When a broken servant girl collapsed in front of the most powerful alphas in the world, bleeding onto marble floors, everyone expected her death. What they got instead was a war. Stay until the end to see how the girl they tried to destroy became the queen who burned their world to ashes. Drop a like and comment which city you're watching from. Let's build this pack together. The grand celestial hall gleamed like a monument to excess. Chandeliers dripped from vaulted ceilings, each crystal catching light and scattering it across polished marble floors that stretched endlessly in every direction. The air hummed with power, thick, oppressive, dangerous. This wasn't just a gathering, it was a display. Every alpha who mattered had come to the summit, their territories represented by banners hanging from gilded columns that reached toward the heavens. Crescent Ridge, Iron Peak, Shadowfen, Stormclaw, Bloodmoon, Nightfall. Names that commanded fear. Names built on bloodlines that stretched back centuries, on wars won and enemies crushed, on dominance so absolute it had become legend. And then there was Alara Voss. She didn't belong here. She knew it. They knew it. Everyone in this glittering hall of predators knew it. Alara moved through the crowd like smoke, quiet, formless, desperate not to be seen. Her bare feet whispered against cold stone, each step carefully placed to avoid drawing attention. The thin servant's dress clung to her frame, threadbare and stained, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. The fabric was so worn she could feel every draft, every shift in temperature. Her wrists bore faint scars, old and new, layered like rings on a tree. Each one told a story she'd learned not to speak aloud. Some were from rope burns, others from silver chains, a few from punishments she couldn't even remember the reasons for anymore. She carried a silver tray, hands trembling just enough to make the glasses rattle. She steadied them quickly, muscles tensing with the effort. Mistakes weren't tolerated. Not here. Not ever. Not when you were already considered disposable. Move faster. Defect. The voice sliced through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. Alara flinched but didn't look up. She knew who it was without having to see his face. Beta Corvin, her alpha's right hand, a man whose cruelty had no ceiling and no audience requirement. He enjoyed the suffering, relished it, fed off it like it was oxygen. "Yes, Beta," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of conversation and laughter that filled the hall. He leaned closer, his breath hot and rancid against her ear, reeking of wine and malice. "If you embarrass Alpha Thorn tonight, I'll make sure you don't wake up tomorrow. Understand? I'll drag you to the cellars myself and make it last for hours." She nodded, throat tight, unable to form words even if she'd wanted to. Corvin stepped back, satisfaction flickering across his scarred face before he disappeared into the crowd like a shark sliding back into dark waters. Alara exhaled slowly, forcing her heart to slow, counting backwards from 10 the way she'd taught herself years ago. She couldn't afford panic. Not now. Survival required control of her body, her breathing, her thoughts, every micro-expression that might betray fear or pain or the deep, bone-crushing exhaustion that never fully left her. Panic was a luxury for people who had hope. She hadn't had hope in years. Around her, the summit unfolded in waves of grandeur and violence barely concealed beneath silk and smiles. Alphas greeted each other with dominance displays disguised as handshakes, their grips crushing, their eyes locked in silent challenges that could erupt into bloodshed at any moment. Betas circled like sharks, assessing threats, identifying weaknesses, calculating angles. Omegas, those fortunate enough to be claimed by powerful alphas, clung to their partner's arms, draped in jewels and furs that cost more than entire villages, their beauty weaponized, their status elevated by association. The hierarchy was absolute, unquestionable, divine, some said. And Alara existed below it all. She was packless in every way that mattered. Technically, she belonged to the Ashvale pack, but belonging implied value, protection, purpose. She had none of those things. She was a tool, a broken one. Branded with their mark, a vicious scar on her left shoulder blade that still ached in cold weather, but given none of their protection, none of their resources, none of their regard. The worst part? She'd never shifted. In a world where your wolf defined your worth, where the ability to transform was as fundamental as breathing, Alara had nothing. No transformation. No connection to the primal power that coursed through every other person in this room, like fire through their veins. She was human in all the ways that mattered, trapped in a society that saw humanity as weakness, as failure, as something to be pitied at best and destroyed at worst. Defect. Broken thing. Wolfless trash. Genetic failure. The names followed her like shadows, whispered behind hands, spat in her face, carved into her sense of self until she almost believed them. She moved through the hall, refilling glasses with practiced precision, clearing plates, keeping her head down, making herself small. The work was endless, the scrutiny constant. Every alpha here had brought their own servants, their own displays of wealth and power, but none were as pitiful as her. She could feel their eyes on her sometimes, brief, dismissive glances that confirmed what they already believed. She was an aberration, a mistake, evidence that even the strongest bloodlines could produce garbage. She was nothing. "Excuse me." Alara stopped, her heart skipping. A tall woman stood before her, draped in emerald silk that shimmered like scales, her wolf's presence radiating outward like heat from a flame. Everything about her screamed wealth and power. The diamonds at her throat, the perfect waves of her auburn hair, the confidence in her posture. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, cruel in the casual way that only the truly privileged could achieve. "Yes, my lady?" Alara kept her gaze lowered, fixed on the woman's silk shoes that probably cost more than a year of food. "You're from Asheville, aren't you?" "Yes, my lady." The woman's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "I thought so." Thorn always did have a taste for broken things. Like collecting damaged goods makes him seem merciful. Laughter rippled from the women beside her, sharp and cutting. Alara said nothing. There was nothing to say. Defending herself only made it worse. She'd learned that lesson early and permanently. "Tell me," the woman continued, leaning closer, her perfume overwhelming and expensive. "Is it true you've never shifted? Not even once? Not even during your first heat?" Alara's jaw tightened. "No, my lady." "Fascinating." The word dripped with mockery, each syllable a small knife. "What a waste of skin. What a burden on your pack. Tell me, do you ever wonder why they keep you alive, out of pity, obligation? Or do they just enjoy having something to look down on?" More laughter. Alara's hands trembled. She gripped the tray tighter, knuckles white, nails digging into her palms hard enough to leave marks. "Move along, defect," the woman said, waving her away like she was dismissing a bug. "You're blocking my view." Alara obeyed. She always obeyed. It was the only way to survive. The night dragged on, each hour heavier than the last, time stretching like taffy. Alara's feet ached, blisters forming on top of old blisters, her calves screaming from hours of standing. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and even that had been scraps from the kitchen, stale bread, and a piece of fruit too bruised for the alphas to eat. But hunger was familiar. Hunger was manageable. She'd spent entire weeks subsisting on almost nothing. It was the exhaustion that worried her, the kind that made her vision blur at the edges, that made her hands shake no matter how hard she tried to steady them, that made her thoughts slow and syrupy. She couldn't afford to falter. Not tonight. The summit wasn't just a social event. It was a proving ground. Packs formed alliances here, settled blood feuds, demonstrated strength, consolidated power. Weakness here could ripple outward, destabilizing entire territories, leading to challenges, wars, massacres. And Alpha Thorn, her alpha, was already on unstable ground. His pack was fracturing from within. Challenges to his authority were becoming more frequent. Young wolves were questioning his decisions. Border disputes were escalating. He needed this night to go perfectly. Needed to project strength, unity, control, which meant Alara needed to be invisible. She slipped into a side corridor, seeking a moment of reprieve, her legs nearly giving out as she leaned against the wall. The stone walls muffled the noise from the main hall, offering a brief pocket of silence that felt like mercy. Alara leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, letting herself breathe. Just breathe. In and out. Simple, mechanical, survivable. "You look like hell." Her eyes snapped open. A young woman stood a few feet away, dressed in servant's clothes similar to her own, a gray, shapeless dress that marked them both as property. But unlike Alara, this girl's eyes held no fear, only exhaustion and a spark of something that might have been defiance in another life. "I'm fine," Alara said quietly, automatically. The girl snorted, a sound somewhere between laughter and despair. "Sure you are, we're all fine. That's why half of us are one mistake away from a beating, and the other half are already dead inside." Alara didn't respond. Acknowledging the truth didn't make it easier to bear, it just made it real. The girl stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "You hear the rumors?" "What rumors?" Alara asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Rumors in this world were rarely good news. "About the king." Alara's breath caught. Everyone had heard whispers about King Kyle Draven, the Apex Alpha, the living nightmare who ruled the Northern Territories with absolute authority, whose very name made grown alphas pale. He rarely appeared at the summit. His presence alone was enough to shift the balance of power, to remind everyone that there was one wolf who stood above all others. But this year, something had changed. He was coming. Some said he'd already arrived. "They say he's looking for something," the girl continued, her eyes darting nervously toward the main hall. "Or someone. No one knows what. But when a king starts hunting," she trailed off, the implication clear. People disappeared. Territories fell. Blood flowed. "Why are you telling me this?" Alara asked, genuinely confused why anyone would waste concern on her. The girl shrugged, something sad crossing her face. "Just thought you should know. Stay out of sight if he shows up. Men like that, they don't see people like us. We're just obstacles, just things in their way. And things in the way of kings tend to get crushed." She walked away before Alara could respond, disappearing around a corner. Alara stood alone in the corridor, the girl's words echoing in her mind like a prophecy. Stay out of sight. It was the only strategy she'd ever had, the only one that worked. Invisibility was survival. She pushed off the wall, her body protesting every movement, and headed back toward the main hall. The break was over. Work never stopped. Pain never stopped. The machinery of this world ground on whether you were ready or not. But as she stepped through the archway, the air changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in temperature, a drop in pressure, like the moment before lightning strikes. The kind of change that happened before a storm, before an earthquake, before everything you knew shattered. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Laughter died in throats. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, every wolf's instinct suddenly screaming danger. And then he entered. King Kyle Draven. Alara had never seen him before, had only heard stories that seemed too terrible to be true, but she knew him instantly. There was no mistaking that presence. It wasn't just power, it was inevitability, like gravity, like death, like the end of all things. He moved through the hall with the kind of confidence that came from never having been challenged and surviving every challenge anyway, from knowing with absolute certainty that he was the apex predator in every room he entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his frame built for violence. His dark hair was pulled back to reveal a face carved from stone and shadow, all harsh angles and brutal beauty. His eyes were black, not brown, not dark gray, but black, like looking into an abyss that stared back and found you wanting. He wore no crown, no ceremonial robes, no symbols of office. He didn't need them. Authority radiated from him like heat from the sun, undeniable and overwhelming. Every alpha in the room bowed. Every single one. The most powerful wolves in their world, alphas who commanded thousands, who'd won wars, who'd built empires, all lowered their heads in deference. Even Alpha Thorn, who prided himself on dominance and had never bowed to anyone in Alara's memory, lowered his head and exposed his throat in submission. Alara felt her knees weaken. She'd thought she understood power. She'd been wrong. This was something else entirely. This was primal. This was the force that created the hierarchy in the first place. Kael's gaze swept the room, dismissive and absolute. He wasn't here for pleasantries, wasn't here to play politics or forge alliances. He was here for something specific, something he wanted, and what a king wanted, a king took. And then his eyes stopped. Alara's heart stuttered in her chest. He wasn't looking at her. He couldn't be. She was nothing, invisible, beneath notice. but his nostrils flared just slightly. His head tilted like a predator catching an unfamiliar scent on the wind. His entire body went still in that way that meant a wolf was focusing, hunting, processing information that didn't make sense. No. Please, no. Don't see me. Alara took a step back, her body moving on instinct, trying to melt into the crowd. But the tray in her hands tilted, unbalanced by her sudden movement. She tried to correct it, overcorrected, her exhaustion betraying her at the worst possible moment. Time seemed to slow. The tray fell from her hands, crystal shattered against marble, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Red wine spread across white stone like blood, like a wound opening in the floor itself, and every eye in the room turned to her. Alara's breath stopped. This was it, the mistake, the one she couldn't take back, the one that would end her. Alpha Thorn's face twisted with rage, his handsome features contorting into something monstrous. She could see his wolf rising to the surface, could see the murder in his eyes. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, each footfall like thunder, his hand rising to strike. You useless piece of— Enough! The word cut through the hall like a blade through flesh. Thorn froze mid-strike, his hand suspended in the air inches from Alara's face. Slowly, like a man moving through water, he turned. Kale stood 10 feet away, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were locked on Alara, not on Thorn, not on the broken glass, on her. Who is she? Kale's voice was low, controlled, but it carried absolute authority that made the question sound like a command from the heavens themselves. Thorn hesitated, clearly weighing his options, calculating which response would cause him the least damage. No one, Your Majesty. Just a servant, a defect. She'll be punished severely for this disruption. I didn't ask for an explanation. Kale's gaze never left Alara, pinning her in place like a butterfly to a board. I asked who she is. The room had gone deathly silent. Alara could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Thorn's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. Her name is Alara Voss, Your Majesty. She's wolfless, a burden the pack has carried out of obligation to her dead parents. She has no value, no purpose beyond menial labor. Alara wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to cease existing entirely. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body refused to move. She was caught, pinned beneath the weight of Kael's stare, like a rabbit before a wolf. He took a step closer, then another. The crowd parted without him asking, people stumbling over each other to get out of his way. Alara's knees buckled, but she forced herself to stay upright. She couldn't look at him, couldn't meet those eyes. She kept her gaze locked on the floor, on the spreading wine, on the shattered glass that reflected the chandelier light in 1,000 broken pieces. Look at me. It wasn't a request. It was a command that bypassed her conscious mind and went straight to something primal. Slowly, painfully, fighting every instinct that told her to keep her head down, Alara raised her head and met the eyes of a king. For a moment, the world ceased to exist. There was only him, only her, only the inexplicable pull she felt in her chest, like something inside her recognized something inside him, like 2 magnets snapping together across an impossible distance. Kael's expression shifted, just barely. Confusion flickered across his face, then recognition. Then something she couldn't name, something that looked almost like pain. And then he inhaled. His entire body went rigid. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. His eyes widened just a fraction. His hands clenched into fists so tight she heard knuckles crack. His wolf surged forward, visible in the way his presence expanded, pressing against every person in the room like a physical force that made them all take involuntary steps backward. What? His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried through the silent hall. What is that scent? Alara didn't understand. She smelled like sweat and fear and cheap soap. Nothing more. Nothing that should catch the attention of a king. But Kael stepped closer, his movements predatory now. Hunting, stalking. His nostrils flared as he breathed her in, and something in his expression cracked. You're bleeding. She blinked, confused. Bleeding? She looked down. Her arm. There was a gash along her forearm, shallow but fresh, the edges clean. She must have cut it on the broken glass. She hadn't even felt it. Pain had become such a constant companion she barely registered it anymore. Blood welled from the wound, dark red against pale skin, dripping onto the marble. And Kael couldn't look away from it. His eyes were locked on those drops of blood like they contained the secrets of the universe. That blood. His voice was rough now, strained like he was fighting something. That's not... He stopped himself, his jaw clenched so hard she thought she heard teeth crack. His hands were shaking. The king's hands were shaking. Alara's vision blurred. The exhaustion, the hunger, the fear, the overwhelming impossibility of this moment, it was all crashing down at once. The room tilted. Her legs turned to water. "Your Majesty, please," Thorn interjected, his voice tight with barely concealed panic. "She's not worth your attention. She's damaged goods. I'll remove her immediately and ensure she's properly punished for—" "Touch her," Kael said, his voice dropping to a lethal growl that made every wolf in the room bare their necks in submission. "And I'll remove your head from your shoulders and mount it on the gates of your own territory." Thorn went white as snow. Alara's legs gave out. She felt herself falling, heard the gasps from the crowd, saw the floor rushing up to meet her face. But before she hit the ground, arms caught her. Strong, steady, impossibly gentle. Kael had moved faster than sight, faster than possible. He held her now, cradled against his chest like she was something precious, his expression torn between fury and something that looked almost like anguish. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek, could smell him, pine and winter, and something wild. "No," he whispered, and for the first time his voice carried something other than command. It carried desperation, raw, unfiltered desperation. "No, you can't. Not now. Not after." Alara's vision dimmed, darkness creeping in from the edges. The last thing she saw was his face, hovering above hers, those black eyes filled with something that looked like recognition and loss and relief all tangled together. The last thing she heard was his voice, breaking. "I finally found you." And then the world went black, and Alara Voss, the broken servant, the wolfless defect, the girl no one saw, disappeared into the arms of a king. The summit erupted into chaos behind them, but neither of them noticed. The hunt was over, and everything was about to change. The world returned in fragments, pain first, sharp and insistent, radiating from her forearm where the glass had cut her. Then cold, the kind that seeped into bones and refused to leave. Then voices, muffled and distant, like she was underwater. "Can't be possible." The bloodline was extinct. Lying. She has to be lying. Alara's eyes fluttered open. Her vision swam, shapes blurring and sharpening in nauseating waves. She was no longer on the marble floor of the grand hall. Instead, she lay on something soft. A bed, she realized, though softer than any surface she'd touched in years. Silk sheets cool against her skin. The scent of cedar and leather surrounding her. Where was she? She tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. Every muscle felt like lead. Her head spun violently, forcing her back down. "Don't move!" The voice came from her left, deep, commanding, the same voice that had shattered the summit. Kael. Alara's heart seized. She turned her head slowly, ignoring the protest of her neck muscles. He sat in a chair beside the bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. His black eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. "Where?" Her voice came out as a rasp. Her throat was sand. "My private chambers." He gestured to a glass of water on the bedside table. "Drink." It wasn't a suggestion. Alara's hand trembled as she reached for the glass. She managed to lift it to her lips, the cool water a mercy against her parched throat. She drank greedily, not caring how desperate she looked. When she finished, Kael took the glass from her and set it aside. His fingers brushed hers for just a second, and she felt that pull again, that inexplicable recognition that made no sense. "How long was I unconscious?" she asked. 3 hours. 3 hours. Panic flared in her chest. "Alpha Thorn, he'll—" "Alpha Thorn," Kael interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "is currently in a holding cell awaiting my judgment." Alara's breath caught. "What?" "You heard me?" Kael stood, and this movement was fluid, predatory. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, along with his beta and half his inner circle. They're being questioned as we speak. This had to be a nightmare. Had to be. Alpha Thorn was one of the most powerful wolves in the territories. You didn't just arrest him. You didn't just... Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. Kale turned, and the look on his face made her blood run cold. Because your blood told me a story, and I want to know if that story is true. I don't understand. Don't you? He crossed back to her, moving with that same impossible speed. He sat on the edge of the bed, too close, his presence overwhelming. Tell me, Alara Voss, who were your parents? The question hit her like a physical blow. They're dead. I know they're dead. Everyone knows they're dead. I'm asking who they were. Servants. Like me. The lie came automatically. It was the story she'd been told to repeat her entire life. The story that kept her alive. Kyle's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment. You're lying. I'm not. Your blood, he said, leaning closer, carries a scent that hasn't existed in this world for 23 years. A scent that belongs to a bloodline everyone believes is extinct. So I'll ask you again, and this time, think very carefully before you lie to me. Who were your parents? Alara's mind raced. She didn't know what he was talking about, didn't know what her blood could possibly reveal. She'd always been told she was nobody. Nothing. The daughter of servants who died in a fire when she was an infant. I don't know, she whispered, and this time it was the truth. I don't know anything except what they told me. And what did they tell you? That my parents died when I was a baby. That the pack took me in out of mercy. That I should be grateful they didn't leave me to starve. Kale's jaw tightened. Who told you this? Alpha Thorn, Beta Corvan, everyone. He stood abruptly, turning away from her. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched into fists. When he spoke again, his voice was barely controlled rage. They lied to you. What? They lied. He spun back to face her. Your parents weren't servants, Alara. Your mother was Crown Princess Mira Veilborn of the Northern Kingdom. Your father was her chosen mate, a warrior named Demon Voss. They were slaughtered 23 years ago in a coup that wiped out the entire royal bloodline. Or so everyone thought. The room tilted. Alara gripped the sheets, her knuckles white. That's impossible. Is it? Then explain your blood. Explain why the royal scent, a scent that hasn't existed since the massacre, is pouring from your veins right now. I'm wolfless, she said desperately. I can't even shift. How could I possibly be? Because someone made sure you couldn't. Kale's voice was steel. Someone suppressed your wolf, poisoned you, kept you weak and broken so you'd never know what you are. Alara shook her head, the motion making her dizzy. This was insane. She was a servant, a defect. She'd spent her entire life being told exactly how worthless she was. This couldn't be real. You're wrong, she whispered. Am I? Kyle pulled something from his pocket, a small vial filled with dark liquid. Her blood. I had my healers test this. Do you know what they found? She couldn't speak. Wolfsbane, as silver oxide, belladonna, lunar root, all mixed together in a cocktail designed to suppress a wolf's ability to shift. You've been poisoned, Alara, systematically, probably since you were a child. The words hit her like blows. Poisoned. Her entire life, she'd thought she was broken, defective. But what if she wasn't? What if they'd made her that way? Why? Her voice cracked. Why would they do that? Because a living heir to the Northern Kingdom is a threat to everyone who benefited from its fall. Kale set the vial on the table with deliberate care. When your family was murdered, their territories were carved up and distributed among the surviving alphas. Thorn received a significant portion. If you were discovered alive, if your wolf ever emerged, you could reclaim everything. You could challenge the entire power structure. Alara's mind reeled. But I'm nobody. I don't want territories or power. I just want survival? Kael's expression softened just slightly. I know, but what you want doesn't matter to them. What you are, that's the threat. She stared at her hands, at the bandage wrapped around her forearm where the cut had been. Her blood, the blood of a princess. It was impossible, absurd. And yet some part of her, some deep-buried part she'd never allowed herself to acknowledge, whispered that it was true. "I don't believe you," she said, but the words had no strength. "You will." Kael moved toward the door. "My healers are preparing a treatment to purge the poison from your system. It will take time, and it won't be pleasant. But if I'm right, and I am, your wolf will emerge once the suppression is lifted. And if you're wrong—" He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Then I'll have wasted resources on a broken servant, and you'll remain exactly what you've always been." He looked back at her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. "But I'm not wrong, Elara. I've been searching for you for 5 years. I know you're sent. I know what you are." "Searching for me? Why?" But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Elara sat in the silence, her thoughts a chaotic storm. A princess. Poisoned. Heir to a murdered kingdom. It was too much. Too impossible. And yet, she looked at her hands again, really looked at them. The scars, the calluses, the evidence of a life spent in servitude. If what Kael said was true, then everything she'd endured, every beating, every humiliation, every moment of despair had been a lie. A carefully constructed prison. The door opened again. A woman entered, older, with silver streaking her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. She carried a leather bag and moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "I'm Healer Maris," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "The king has asked me to examine you." Elara tensed. "I'm fine." "You collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. You're not fine." Maris set her bag on the table and began pulling out instruments. "I'm going to take some samples and assess your condition. This won't hurt." It did hurt. Everything hurt. But Elara endured it silently, the way she'd learned to endure everything. Maris worked quickly, drawing blood, checking her vitals, examining the cut on her arm with clinical precision. Her expression remained neutral, but Elara caught the small flinches, the tightening around her eyes. "What is it?" Elara asked. "You're severely malnourished," Maris said bluntly. "Dehydrated. Your iron levels are dangerously low. You have old fractures that healed incorrectly, scar tissue throughout your muscle structure, and—" She paused, her jaw tightening. "And enough toxins in your system to kill a normal wolf 3 times over." "But I'm not a normal wolf." "No," Maris met her eyes. "You're not, which is the only reason you're still alive." The confirmation settled over Elara like a shroud. It was real. All of it was real. "Can you fix it?" she whispered. "The poisoning? Yes. It will take time and considerable pain, but we can purge your system." Maris began packing her instruments away. "The malnutrition and injuries will heal once your wolf emerges. Your body will regenerate." "And if my wolf doesn't emerge?" Maris looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Then you'll remain broken." "But between you and me, girl, I've been a healer for 40 years. I've never seen a wolf suppress this aggressively unless there was something powerful to suppress." She left, and Elara was alone again. Hours passed. She drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams fractured and dark. She saw faces she didn't recognize. A woman with golden hair and kind eyes. A man with a warrior's build and a gentle smile. Were they her parents? Or just phantoms her desperate mind had conjured? When she woke again, it was dark outside. The room was lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. And Kael was back. He sat in the same chair, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. How long had he been there? "You should rest," he said. "I've been resting." Elara pushed herself up, ignoring the protests of her body. "I want answers." "What answers?" "You said you've been searching for me. Why? What am I to you?" Something shifted in his expression, something raw. "You're the last heir to the Northern Kingdom. Your bloodline—" "That's not what I'm asking." She forced herself to hold his gaze. "What am I to you?" The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Finally, Kael stood. He walked to the window, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "When your family was murdered, I was 17. Too young to stop it. Too weak to challenge the alphas who orchestrated it. I watched your kingdom burn, and I did nothing. You were a child. I was a prince." He turned, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke her. I became king 3 years later, and I swore I would find out what happened to the missing princess. Everyone said you died in the fire with your parents, but bodies were never found. So I searched. 5 years of searching, following rumors, chasing ghosts, and tonight, I finally found you. Why does it matter so much to you? Because I owe your family a debt I can never repay. And because... He stopped himself. Because what? Because you're my mate. The words hung in the air like a blade. Alara's world tilted again. What? The bond. You feel it too, don't you? That pull, that recognition. Kael moved closer, his movements careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. It's why I couldn't look away from you, why your scent nearly brought me to my knees. You're my fated mate, Alara, the other half of my soul. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. That's impossible. I'm wolfless. Mates can't... You're not wolfless. You're suppressed. There's a difference. He was close now. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. And the bond doesn't care about logic or timing or whether you're ready. It just is. Alara wanted to deny it, wanted to call him insane, but that pull in her chest, that inexplicable recognition, it made a terrible kind of sense. I don't want this, she whispered. Neither do I. His honesty was brutal. A mate is a weakness, a liability. In my position, it's dangerous. Then reject me. I can't. The words came out rough, almost angry. Believe me, I've tried. 5 years of trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that I was mistaken. But the moment I scented you, he turned away. I can't reject you, Alara, and I won't let anyone else hurt you ever again. Before she could respond, the door burst open. A guard stood in the doorway, his face pale. Your Majesty, we have a problem. Kael's demeanor shifted instantly. Speak. Alpha Thorn. He's demanding a formal challenge. A challenge? Kael's voice was ice. On what grounds? He claims you've overstepped your authority by imprisoning him without trial. He's invoking his rights as an alpha and demanding satisfaction through combat. Alara's stomach dropped. A formal challenge meant a fight to the death. And while Kael was powerful, Thorn was vicious and had decades of combat experience. Fine. Kael's voice was casual, like he was discussing the weather. I accept. When? Dawn. The summit grounds. Traditional rules. Agreed. You're dismissed. The guard fled. Alara struggled to her feet, her legs shaking. You can't fight him. Why not? Because he'll try to kill you. Kael smiled, and it was a terrifying thing to see. Let him try. This isn't a joke. He's dangerous. He's Eclipse. Alara. Kael crossed to her, his hands gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. I have been king for 8 years. I have fought and killed more alphas than you can count. Thorn is nothing, a coward who poisons children and abuses the powerless. I will end him. And if something goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, then you'll be free. His thumbs brushed against her shoulders, the touch achingly gentle. My will is already prepared. If I fall, everything I own goes to you. My territories, my resources, my protection. You'll be safe. I don't want your territories. I want... She stopped herself. What do you want? The question was too big, too complicated. She didn't know how to answer. I want to stop being afraid, she finally whispered. Kael's expression softened. Then let me fight for you. Let me give you that. Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. The gesture was intimate, tender, completely at odds with the violence he'd just promised. Rest, he murmured. Tomorrow, everything changes. He left her standing there, alone in the dark, her world shattered and reforming into something she didn't recognize. Tomorrow, a king would fight for her. Tomorrow, she would learn if the broken servant girl had ever existed at all, or if she'd always been a princess in chains. The dawn came cold and merciless. Alara stood at the edge of the summit grounds, wrapped in a cloak that was too fine for her, surrounded by guards who'd been ordered to keep her safe. The entire summit had gathered, hundreds of alphas, betas, and omegas from every territory, all come to witness the challenge. The arena was a circular clearing surrounded by ancient stones, marked with runes older than memory. This was where disputes were settled, where blood had been spilled for 1,000 years. Thorn entered from the south, his wolf barely contained, eyes blazing with rage. He'd stripped to the waist, his body a map of scars and muscle. Behind him, his remaining pack members howled their support. Kael entered from the north, alone, silent, utterly calm. He wore simple combat leathers, no armor, no weapons. He didn't need them. The two alphas faced each other across the circle. An elder stepped forward, ancient and gnarled, his voice carrying across the grounds. This is a formal challenge. Alpha against alpha. To the death or submission? Do you both accept the terms? I accept, Thorn snarled. I accept, Kael said quietly. Then begin. Thorn shifted instantly, his transformation brutal and fast. His wolf was massive, dark gray with silver markings, foam at its jaws. He launched himself at Kael with killing intent. Kael didn't move. At the last possible second, he sidestepped, smooth as water. His hand shot out, catching Thorn's wolf by the throat mid-leap. The impact should have been impossible. A human hand stopping a wolf mid-attack. But Kael wasn't fully human anymore. His wolf had surged forward, lending him strength without fully emerging. He slammed Thorn into the ground with enough force to crack stone. The crowd gasped. Thorn scrambled up, blood pouring from his mouth, and attacked again, faster this time, more desperate. Kael met him head-on. What followed wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Kael moved like violence given form, each strike precise and devastating. He broke bones, tore flesh, reduced Thorn's proud wolf to a bleeding, whimpering mess in under 5 minutes. And through it all, he never fully shifted. Finally, Kael stood over Thorn's broken body, his boot on the alpha's throat. Submit, Kael commanded. Thorn's wolf shifted back, leaving a broken man gasping in the dirt. Never. Then die. Wait! The shout came from Corvin, Thorn's beta, who'd pushed through the crowd. Please, Your Majesty, mercy. He's beaten. You've made your point. Kael looked at Corvon with something like contempt. Mercy? Did he show mercy to the girl he poisoned for 20 years? Did he show mercy when he beat her, starved her, branded her? Silence. No, Kael continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the grounds. He showed her nothing but cruelty, and now he'll receive exactly what he gave. He looked down at Thorn one last time. You took a princess and tried to break her into a slave. For that, there is no mercy. His claws extended. Thorn's scream cut off abruptly. When it was done, Kael stood in a pool of blood, his expression unchanged. He looked at the gathered alphas, his message clear. Touch what's mine, and this is your fate. Alara watched from the edge, her hands clutching the cloak so tightly her fingers went numb. She should have felt satisfaction, relief, justice. Instead, she felt nothing but cold, because she'd just watched a king commit murder for her. And part of her, a dark, broken part she'd tried to bury, was glad. The silence that followed Thorn's death was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. The gathered alphas stared at the blood spreading across ancient stones, at the king standing in the center of it all, unbothered and unrepentant. This wasn't just a challenge resolved. This was a statement written in viscera. Kael turned slowly, his black eyes sweeping across the crowd. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Let this be understood. Anyone who harms what belongs to me will meet the same fate. There will be no warnings, no second chances, only death. He stepped out of the circle, blood dripping from his hands, and walked directly toward Alara. The crowd parted like he was plague itself. When he reached her, his expression softened infinitesimally. Come. It wasn't a request, but his hand extended toward her was gentle. Alara stared at it, at the blood coating his fingers, and something inside her cracked. This man, this king, had just killed for her, had declared her his in front of the most powerful wolves in the world. She should have been terrified. Instead, she took his hand. The contact sent electricity through her veins. That pull, that bond he'd spoken of, flared to life like touching a live wire. Kael's fingers tightened around hers, and she saw something flash in his eyes. Recognition, possession, need. They walked through the silent crowd together, and Alara felt every eye on her. Not with pity anymore, not with contempt, with fear, with calculation. She'd gone from invisible servant to the king's claimed mate in less than 24 hours. Target was a better word. Back in Kyl's chambers, he finally released her hand and moved to a basin of water, washing Thorn's blood away with methodical precision. Alara stood near the door, watching him, her mind racing. "You didn't have to kill him?" she said quietly. "Yes, I did." Kyle dried his hands, his movements controlled. A challenge demands a resolution. Submission or death. He chose death. He didn't choose. You didn't give him the option. He had 23 years to choose mercy. He chose cruelty instead. Kyle turned to face her. "Do you pity him?" "No." The answer came too quickly, too honestly. I don't understand why you'd risk so much for me. You don't know me. I could be exactly what they said, broken, worthless, a mistake. You're not. How can you be so sure?" Kyle crossed to her, and this time when he moved, there was something different in his posture. Vulnerability, maybe, or exhaustion. "Because I've spent 5 years searching for you. Because your blood sings to mine in a way nothing else ever has. Because when I saw you collapse in that hall, something in me that's been dead for years came back to life." He stopped inches from her. "You want certainty? I have none. All I have is instinct. And my instinct says you're worth burning the world for." Alara's breath caught. "That's insane." "Yes." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It is." Before she could respond, the door burst open. A different guard this time, younger, his face flushed with urgency. "Your Majesty, the council is convening. They're demanding an audience." Kyle's expression hardened instantly. "Tell them I'll attend when I'm ready." "They're insistent, Your Majesty. They say it's about the girl." Of course it was. Kyle looked at Alara, something like apology in his eyes. "Wait here, I'll handle this." "No." The word came out stronger than she expected. "If they're talking about me, I should be there." "Alara, I'm not hiding anymore." She lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of courage she had left. "If I'm supposed to be a princess, then I need to start acting like one, even if I don't believe it yet." Kyle studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "All right, but stay close to me. The council can be difficult." That was an understatement. The council chambers were located in the eastern wing of the summit complex, a massive room built from dark stone and filled with heavy furniture that screamed old power. 12 chairs arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by an alpha representing a major territory. These were the wolves who'd survived centuries of conflict, who'd built empires on the bones of their enemies, and every single one of them looked at Alara like she was a problem to be solved. Kyle entered first, his presence immediately dominating the space. Alara followed, acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her borrowed dress, how small she felt under the weight of their collective stare. "Gentlemen," Kyle said, his tone deceptively pleasant, "you called this meeting. Speak." An older alpha stood, his silver hair pulled back, his face carved from weathered stone. Alpha Cornelius of Iron Peak. Alara recognized him from the summit, one of the wolves who'd received territory after her family's massacre. "Your Majesty," Cornelius began, his voice gravelly, "we have concerns about recent events. The execution of Alpha Thorn, while within your rights, has created instability. And your claims about this girl," he gestured dismissively at Alara, "are creating dangerous rumors." "Dangerous how?" Kael's voice was ice. "You claim she's the lost princess of the Northern Kingdom, that her bloodline survived the Purge. If true, this creates significant legal complications regarding territorial rights, inheritance claims, and power distribution." "If true," Kael stepped forward. "Are you questioning my judgment, Cornelius?" "We're questioning the evidence." Another alpha stood, younger, with cruel eyes. "Alpha Darius of Shadowfen. You've produced a servant girl with a convenient bloodline claim and no ability to shift. Forgive us if we're skeptical." My healers confirmed the poisoning. The blood tests can be faked, Darius interrupted, or misinterpreted. We need proof, Your Majesty. Real proof. Not just your word and some blood samples. The room murmured agreement. Alara felt her stomach twist. They didn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. Because if she was real, if she was legitimate, then everything they'd built on her family's graves was stolen. What proof would satisfy you? Kale's voice was dangerously quiet. Cornelius exchanged glances with the other alphas. Her wolf. If she truly carries royal blood, her wolf will be distinct, powerful, unmistakable. Let her shift, and we'll believe. She's been poisoned for 2 decades. Her wolf is suppressed. Then suppress it, Darius said coldly. If she's truly a princess, her wolf should be strong enough to break through eventually. We're willing to wait. But until she shifts, she's nothing but a servant with delusions. Alara's hands clenched into fists. Nothing but a servant. The words were knives, familiar and sharp. Watch your tongue, Kael growled. Or what? You'll kill us too? Darius smiled, sharp and mocking. You may be king, Your Majesty, but even you can't murder the entire council without consequences. We're not demanding anything unreasonable. We simply want proof before we accept that the power structure of the entire Northern Territories needs to be upended for one wolfless girl. The room fell silent. Alara felt every eye on her, judging, dismissing, waiting for her to fail. Something hot and sharp kindled in her chest. Rage, maybe, or pride, or just exhaustion with being called worthless by wolves who'd never suffered a day in their lives. She stepped forward, out of Kael's shadow. You want proof? Kael turned to her sharply. Alara, don't... You want me to shift? She looked at Cornelius, then Darius, then each alpha in turn. Fine. Give me 1 week. Purge the poison, and I'll shift in front of all of you. And when I do, when you see what I am, every single one of you who benefited from my family's murder will return what you stole. Every territory, every resource, every coin, or I'll take it back myself. The room erupted. Outrageous! The girl's delusional. This is exactly why we can't... Enough! Kael's roar silenced them all. He turned to Alara, his expression torn between fury and something that might have been admiration. Are you certain? No, she wasn't certain of anything, but she was tired of being afraid, tired of being small. Yes, she said. Kael held her gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the council. You heard her. 1 week, my healers will purge the poison from her system. At the end of that week, she'll shift before this council. And when she does, when you see the white wolf of the Veilborn line, you'll kneel. All of you. White wolf? Cornelius laughed, the sound bitter. The white wolves are myths, stories to scare children. Then you have nothing to fear from 1 week, Kael said smoothly, unless, of course, you're worried the myth might be real. The alphas exchanged uneasy glances. 1 week, Cornelius finally agreed. But if she fails to shift, or if her wolf proves ordinary, this matter is settled. She returns to whatever pack will take her, and we never speak of this again. Agreed, Kael said. They left the council chambers in tense silence. The moment they were alone in the corridor, Kael grabbed Alara's arm and pulled her into an empty room. What were you thinking? His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the fury beneath it. I was thinking I'm tired of being called worthless by wolves who don't know me. You just wagered your life on an ability you've never demonstrated. If you can't shift, then I'll die having tried. Alara pulled her arm free. Which is better than living another day as something broken. You're not broken. Then prove it. The words exploded out of her. You keep saying I'm a princess, that I'm your mate, that I'm powerful and suppressed and valuable, but I don't feel any of that. I feel exactly like what I've always been, a servant who's in over her head. So prove it. Purge the poison. Let me shift, and if I fail, at least I'll know the truth. Kael stared at her, his jaw tight. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a harsh sound, but genuine. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Can I be both? His expression softened. Yes, you can. He ran a hand through his hair. All right, we do this. But you need to understand, Purging that amount of poison from your system will be excruciating. It could take days. You'll wish you were dead. I've wished that before. I survived. The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Kyle's eyes darkened. No one will ever make you wish that again. I swear it. The next 3 days were hell. Healer Maris had prepared a treatment protocol that involved drinking vile concoctions every 4 hours, each one designed to bind with the toxins in Alara's blood and force them out through every pore, every orifice. The process was medieval and effective. Alara spent most of the first day vomiting into a basin while her body expelled decades of accumulated poison. Her fever spiked to dangerous levels. Her muscles cramped so violently she thought her bones would break. Maris stayed with her through it all, monitoring her vitals, adjusting dosages, keeping her from dying. Kyle visited when he could, sitting beside her bed in silence. Sometimes he'd hold her hand. Sometimes he'd just watch, his expression unreadable. On the second day, the real pain started. It felt like her bones were being reconstructed from the inside out, like her muscles were tearing and reknitting themselves. Her wolf, suppressed for so long it had nearly ceased to exist, was starting to wake up. And it was angry. Alara screamed herself hoarse. She begged for it to stop. She cursed Kale, cursed Maris, cursed herself for agreeing to this madness. "It's working," Maris said, checking her vitals with grim satisfaction. "Your wolf is fighting the suppression, fighting to emerge." "It hurts," Alara gasped. "Good. Pain means you're alive, means you're strong enough to survive this." On the third day, something shifted. The pain didn't stop, but it changed, became focused. Alara could feel something moving beneath her skin, something powerful and primal that had been caged her entire life. Her wolf. It circled inside her consciousness like a trapped animal, testing boundaries, searching for escape. And for the first time in her life, Alara reached back. The connection was electric, overwhelming. Her wolf's consciousness slammed into hers with the force of a tidal wave, carrying memories that weren't hers, couldn't be hers. Running through forests under moonlight, hunting with a pack, standing beside a golden-haired woman who smiled with Alara's own eyes. Mother. The word echoed through her mind, and suddenly she knew. The memories weren't fabricated. They were real. Buried so deep she'd forgotten them, but real. She had shifted before. As a child, before they'd poisoned her, before they'd taken everything. The rage that followed was incandescent. Alara's eyes snapped open, glowing with an inner light that made Maris stumble backward. The healer's expression shifted from concern to awe. "Impossible," Maris whispered. "Your eyes. What about them?" "They're silver, pure silver. That's the mark of the Veilborn line." Before Alara could respond, the door burst open. Not a guard this time. Beta Corvon Thorn's second, bloody and wild-eyed, with 3 wolves behind him. "You," he snarled, pointing at Alara. "You destroyed everything. You killed my alpha. You—" He didn't finish. His hand came up, holding something small and dark. A crossbow. Silver-tipped bolt aimed directly at Alara's heart. Time seemed to slow. Maris screamed. Corvin's finger tightened on the trigger, and something inside Alara broke. Not broke. Shattered. Every barrier, every suppression, every chain they'd wrapped around her wolf for 23 years exploded outward in a wave of pure power that shook the entire building. Her body erupted in transformation. Not smooth, not controlled, violent and primal and absolutely unstoppable. Bones shifted. Muscles reformed. Fur burst through skin in patches of pure white that gleamed like fresh snow. The pain was indescribable. The freedom was worth it. When the transformation completed, Alara stood on 4 legs for the first time in her conscious memory. She was massive, larger than any wolf she'd ever seen, her fur white as winter, her eyes burning silver. And she was furious. Corvin's crossbow clattered to the floor. His face went white. No, that's not possible. The white wolves are extinct. They're... Alara's growl cut him off. It reverberated through the room, through the walls, through the bones of every wolf in the building. It was the sound of a predator that had been caged too long. The sound of a queen reclaiming her throne. She launched herself at Corvin with speed that defied physics. Her jaws closed around his throat before he could scream. His wolves tried to intervene, but she was faster, stronger, powered by decades of suppressed rage. The fight lasted seconds. When it ended, 4 bodies lay scattered across the floor, and Alara stood in the center of the carnage, her white fur now stained red. The door slammed open. Kael stood in the doorway, his own wolf barely contained, his eyes wild, until he saw her. His expression transformed. Shock, awe, recognition, and something deeper, something that looked almost like relief. "Alara," he breathed. She turned to face him, this king who'd claimed her, and for the first time she met him as an equal. Her wolf recognized his. The bond snapped into place with brutal clarity, undeniable and absolute. "Mate." The word echoed through both their minds simultaneously. Kael's wolf surged forward, and he shifted in a fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime of practice. His wolf was enormous, black as midnight, with eyes that matched her silver. They circled each other, 2 apex predators recognizing their match. And then Kael did something that made Alara's wolf still. He lowered his head, exposed his throat. The king bowed to the queen. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. The council was coming, drawn by the commotion. They poured into the room, a dozen alphas ready to fight or flee. They stopped dead when they saw her. A white wolf, standing over 4 dead enemies, silver eyes blazing with power that made the air itself crackle. And beside her the king, bowed in submission. Cornelius's face went ashen. "It can't be." "But it is," Maris said from where she'd pressed herself against the wall, her voice carrying a mix of terror and triumph. "The lost princess. The white wolf of Velborn. She's real." Alara shifted back to human form, the transformation easier this time, more natural. She stood naked and blood-stained in the center of the room, her silver eyes meeting each council member in turn. "You wanted proof," she said, her voice carrying a power it had never held before. "Here it is. I am Alara Velborn, daughter of Mira and Daemon, heir to the Northern Kingdom, and I've come to take back what you stole." The silence was deafening. Then, one by one, starting with Cornelius, the council members dropped to their knees. Not in respect, in terror. Because they just realized they'd spent 23 years sitting on territories that belonged to someone who could destroy them all. Kael shifted back, immediately wrapping her in his cloak, his hands gentle, despite the violence still thrumming through the air. "Are you all right?" "No." Alara looked at the bodies, at the blood, at her own shaking hands. "But I will be." He pulled her close, and she let him, let herself take comfort from his warmth even as her mind reeled. She'd shifted. She'd killed. She'd proven them all wrong. But as she looked at the kneeling alphas, at the fear in their eyes, she realized something that made her blood run cold. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because now that they knew what she was, now that they'd seen her power, they had 2 choices. Accept her as their rightful queen, or eliminate the threat she represented. And wolves who'd killed to take power once wouldn't hesitate to kill again to keep it. "We need to leave," Kael murmured against her hair. "Now, before they regroup." "Leave? You proved you're a threat they can't ignore, which makes you a target for every alpha in this room." His arms tightened around her. "We need to get you somewhere safe while we plan our next move." "I'm not running." "It's not running, it's strategy." He pulled back to look at her, his expression fierce. "You're a queen, Alara, but even queens need armies. Let me build you one." Before she could answer, Cornelius stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "Your Majesty, Princess, if I may speak." Kael's growl was immediate. "You've said enough. Please." Cornelius raised his hands, placating. "I understand your anger, your distrust, but we're not all your enemies. Some of us—" He glanced at the other alphas. "Some of us knew your parents, respected them. We didn't participate in the coup. We simply accepted the redistribution that followed." "You accepted stolen land," Alara said coldly. "Yes, we did, and for that we owe you restitution." Cornelius took a careful step forward. "But rushing into conflict will only lead to more bloodshed. Give us time to discuss terms, to negotiate a peaceful transition of power." "Negotiate?" Kael's laugh was harsh. "You mean stall while you gather forces to crush her." "No, I mean, find a way forward that doesn't involve civil war. Cornelius looked directly at Alara. Your Highness, you have the law on your side. You have the king's support. You have power that cannot be denied. But you're one wolf. We are hundreds. If this becomes a war, even if you win, the territories will be destroyed in the process. Is that what you want? Alara's mind raced. He was right, and she hated it. She was powerful, yes, but power alone didn't build kingdoms. She needed allies, resources, time. What are you proposing? She asked. A summit, a real one, 2 weeks from now. You attend as the acknowledged princess of the Northern Kingdom. We bring our advisors, our records, our claims, and we negotiate a fair redistribution of territories based on historical precedent and current realities. Cornelius's expression was earnest. No tricks, no violence, just discussion. And if we refuse? Kael asked. Then we fight, and everyone loses. The room held its breath. Alara looked at Kael, reading the warning in his eyes. This could be a trap. Probably was a trap. But it could also be an opportunity. Fine, she said. 2 weeks. But until then, I want safe passage guaranteed. No assassination attempts. No political maneuvering. You leave me alone, and I'll leave you alone. Agreed, Cornelia said immediately. You have my word. Your word means nothing to me, Alara said bluntly. But I'll accept it anyway, because I'm tired of blood. She turned and walked out of the room, Kael close behind her, the cloak wrapped around her like armor. They didn't speak until they were back in his chambers, the door locked and guarded. That was a mistake, Kael said quietly. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Alara, these wolves, they're not going to negotiate in good faith. They're going to use those 2 weeks to prepare for war, to gather allies, to find your weaknesses. Let them. Alara met his eyes. Because I'll be using those 2 weeks too, to learn how to fight, how to lead, how to be the queen they're so afraid of. Kael studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. You really are impossible. I learned from the best. He pulled her into his arms, and this time the embrace felt different. Not protective, equal. 2 apex predators who'd chosen each other. We're going to burn everything down, aren't we? He murmured. Only the parts that deserve it. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. And somewhere in the shadows, enemies were already moving, already planning, already sharpening their knives. But Alara Veilborn, the White Wolf, the Lost Princess, the girl who'd been broken and rebuilt, stood in the arms of a king and smiled. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. The first lesson came at dawn. Alara stood in the training grounds behind Kael's fortress, her body still aching from the transformation, her muscles remembering movements she'd never consciously learned. The space was vast and empty, ringed by ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of warriors honing their craft. Frost clung to the ground, crunching beneath her bare feet. Kael had insisted she train without shoes, claiming her wolf needed to feel the earth. Kael circled her slowly, his movements predatory and assessing, a wolf evaluating potential prey, or potential equal. Show me your stance. She tried to remember what she'd seen other wolves do during training sessions she'd watched while serving. Feet apart, knees bent, hands raised in loose fists. It felt awkward, unnatural, like wearing someone else's skin. No. Kael moved behind her, his hands adjusting her posture with clinical precision. His touch was firm but not rough, repositioning her shoulders, nudging her feet wider with his boot. You're thinking like a human. Your wolf knows how to fight. It's coded into your bones, your instincts. Stop trying to control it and let it guide you. I don't know how to do that. Frustration bled into her voice. I've had my wolf for 3 days. Most wolves get a lifetime to learn this. Then you'll learn faster. No sympathy in his tone. No coddling. Because in 2 weeks, you'll be walking into a room full of alphas who want you dead. If you can't defend yourself, all the royal blood in the world won't save you. They'll tear you apart and claim it was self-defense. The blunt honesty should have terrified her. Instead, it focused her mind with crystalline clarity. Alara closed her eyes, reaching for that connection she'd felt during her shift. Her wolf was there, pacing beneath her skin like a caged wildfire, impatient and eager. She'd spent 23 years suppressed, and now she wanted out, wanted to run and hunt and fight. Alara let the barrier between them thin, just slightly, allowing some of that primal energy to bleed through. Her stance shifted without conscious thought, her weight distributed differently. Her center of gravity dropped, became fluid, balanced, ready. "Better," Kyle said, approval threading through his voice. "Much better. Now attack me." "What?" "You heard me. Attack." Alara hesitated only a second before lunging. Her body moved on instinct, faster than she expected, but Kael sidestepped with fluid ease, his hand catching her wrist and using her momentum against her to send her sprawling onto the frost-covered ground. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Pain bloomed across her shoulder and hip. "Predictable," he said, standing over her. "You telegraphed that attack from 3 seconds away. Again." She pushed herself up, frustration burning in her chest like hot coals. Again and again she attacked, and again he deflected her with minimal effort, making it look effortless. Each failure fed her anger, stoked the flames, and her anger fed her wolf. The beast inside her snarled, demanding she fight harder, move faster, stop holding back. On the 7th attempt, something clicked. Alara fainted left, watching Kael's weight shift to compensate, then drove her shoulder into his midsection from the right with enough force to actually make him stumble backward. It wasn't much, barely 2 steps, but his eyes flashed with approval in something that might have been pride. "There," he said, his breathing barely elevated while hers came in ragged gasps. "That's your wolf thinking, not your human mind overthinking every movement. Do it again." They trained for 3 brutal hours. By the end, Alara was drenched in sweat despite the freezing temperature, covered in bruises that were already starting to heal with her wolf's accelerated regeneration. She'd managed to land 3 solid hits. Kael had landed approximately 300, but she was learning. Her body was remembering. "Enough for today," he finally said, offering her a water skin. "You'll meet with my war council this afternoon. They need to assess what we're working with." "War council?" Alara accepted the water, drinking deeply, the cool liquid a mercy against her parched throat. "I thought we were negotiating peace. We're preparing for war and hoping for peace. There's a difference." Kael's expression was grim, the warrior king replacing the patient teacher. Cornelius might be genuine in his offer, or he might be buying time to position his forces, to gather allies, to prepare for a coordinated strike. Either way, we need to be ready. Hope is not a strategy. The War Council convened in a windowless chamber deep within the fortress, the walls thick stone that muffled all sound from outside. 6 wolves sat around a heavy oak table scarred with centuries of use, each one radiating the kind of competence that came from surviving conflicts most people didn't live to tell about. Maps covered the walls, marked with territories and troop movements. The air smelled of leather, steel, and old smoke. General Thane, Kael's military commander, was a scarred veteran with silver threading his dark hair and eyes that had seen too much death to be shocked by anything anymore. His left hand was missing 2 fingers, a souvenir from some long-ago battle he never discussed. Lady Morgan handled intelligence, her delicate appearance masking a mind sharp enough to cut and a network of informants that stretched across every territory. Commander Dax oversaw the king's guard, massive and silent, a mountain of muscle and loyalty who spoke perhaps 10 words per week. 3 others, strategists, advisors, wolves who'd helped Kyle build his kingdom from blood and ambition. They all stood when Alara entered, but the respect felt perfunctory, obligatory. She could read it in their posture, the slight delay before they rose, the way their eyes assessed her and found her wanting. "Sit," Kael commanded, taking his place at the head of the table. Alara sat beside him in the chair clearly meant for a queen, acutely aware of every assessing gaze, every subtle judgment. Thane didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Let's be direct, Your Highness. You've proven you're Veilborn. That's not in question anymore. The White Wolf doesn't lie. What we need to know is whether you can lead, whether you understand strategy, politics, the brutal reality of ruling contested territories where every decision costs lives." "I understand survival," Alara said quietly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I've been doing it my entire life under conditions that would have broken most wolves." Survival and leadership are different skills, Thane countered. A wolf can survive alone in the wilderness. Leading requires making choices that get other people killed. Can you do that? Can you? She turned the question back on him. Because from where I'm sitting, leadership is just survival on a larger scale. Understanding threats, anticipating attacks, knowing when to fight and when to retreat, when to show mercy and when to be ruthless. The only difference is the number of lives at stake and the weight of responsibility. I've carried my own life for 23 years. I can carry more. Thane's eyebrow raised fractionally, a crack in his stony facade. You've given this thought. I've had time to think. 23 years of watching alphas make decisions, good and bad. 23 years of seeing the consequences play out on people like me. The ones at the bottom who pay for leadership's mistakes with our blood. Alara leaned forward. I know what bad leadership looks like, General. I lived under it. I won't repeat those mistakes. Morgan leaned forward, her fingers steepled, her dark eyes glittering with intelligence. The Council's offer. What do you make of it, Your Highness? A trap, Alara said immediately, no hesitation. Or at best, a delay tactic. They need time to consolidate power, to form alliances against me, to shore up their defenses and prepare for conflict. Cornelius might be sincere. I got the sense he genuinely knew my parents and feels some guilt. But the others? Darius especially. They've built empires on my family's graves. They won't surrender them without a fight, and they certainly won't do it because I asked nicely. Correct. Morgan's smile was thin and approving. So why accept the meeting at all? Because I need time too. Time to learn how to be what they expect or fear. Time to build alliances of my own. Time to understand exactly what I'm reclaiming and what it will cost to hold it. Alara looked at each council member in turn, refusing to be intimidated, and because refusing would make me look afraid. Weak. I can't afford either, not when I'm already fighting against perceptions of me as broken, as lesser. Every action I take now sets a precedent. Silence fell around the table, heavy and assessing. Then Thane nodded slowly, something like respect entering his expression. She's not stupid. That's something. High praise from you, Kael murmured, but Alara caught the hint of amusement in his voice, the subtle pride. The next 2 hours were brutal. The council grilled her on everything, territorial law, historical precedents going back 3 centuries, military strategy from famous battles, economic policy, resource management, the complex web of alliances and blood feuds that defined pack politics. Alara knew almost nothing, had never been taught any of it, but she learned quickly, her mind absorbing information like a sponge desperate for water. When she didn't know an answer, she said so plainly, without apology or shame, or trying to bluff her way through. I don't know, she said when Thane asked about historical tax structures. But I can learn. Give me the texts and I'll read them tonight. You'll need to read faster than that, Morgan said, pushing a stack of books across the table. This is everything you need to know about Northern Territory politics in the last 50 years. You have 3 days. Lara looked at the stack. At least 20 volumes, some of them massive. Then I'd better start now. By the end, exhaustion sat heavy on her shoulders like a physical weight, but she held her ground, refusing to show weakness. One more question, Dax rumbled, speaking for the first time. His voice was like grinding stone, deep and rough. When the fighting starts, and it will start, make no mistake, are you willing to kill? Not in self-defense, not in the heat of transformation, but coldly, deliberately, when it's necessary for the greater good? The question hung in the air. Alara thought of Corvan's body, of the blood on her white fur, of the rage that had driven her transformation. But she thought deeper, too, to what Dax was really asking. Could she make the hard choices? Could she order others to their deaths? Could she become what a queen needed to be? Yes, she said simply, holding his gaze. I can kill. I have killed. And I'll do it again if I have to, because the alternative is letting wolves like Thorn continue to destroy lives. I've seen enough destruction. I won't add to it through weakness or hesitation. Dax studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then nodded once. Good. Queens who can't kill don't stay queens for long. They become martyrs, and martyrs don't protect their people. After the council dispersed, Kael walked her back to her chambers. The fortress was massive, a labyrinth of stone corridors and guarded passages that twisted through multiple levels. She was learning the layout, memorizing routes and exits, but it would take time. "You did well," he said as they walked. "They think I'm a liability, inexperienced and naive. They think you're inexperienced, which you are. There's no point pretending otherwise." He stopped, turning to face her in the empty corridor. "But Thane's right. You're not stupid, and you learn fast, faster than anyone I've seen. That counts for more than most people realize. Experience can be gained. Intelligence can't be taught." "Will it be enough?" "I don't know." His honesty was brutal but appreciated. She was tired of pretty lies. "But we're going to make it enough because we don't have another choice. The world doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just keeps moving, and you either keep up or get crushed." That night, alone in her chambers, Alara opened the first book Morgan had given her, a history of the Northern Territories written by a scholar who'd lived through the coup. She read about her parents, about the kingdom they'd built, about the peace and prosperity that had ended in fire and blood. She fell asleep with the book open on her chest and dreamed of her mother. Not the fractured memories from her transformation, but something clearer, fuller, more real. She saw a woman who looked like an older version of herself, golden hair streaked with silver, silver eyes that held wisdom and sorrow, the same sharp cheekbones and proud bearing. Mira Valborn stood in a great hall. Alara had never seen but somehow recognized, wearing a crown of silver and moonstone that caught the light like captured stars, addressing a gathered crowd of hundreds. "A queen's power isn't in her strength alone," Mira said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space without shouting. "It's in her ability to inspire loyalty, to make others believe in something greater than themselves, greater than their own survival or comfort, to give them a vision of a future worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. Remember that, little one. When the time comes, when you wear this crown, remember that fear might make them obey, but only belief makes them follow." The dream shifted, reality fracturing like broken glass. Darkness. Fire spreading faster than should be possible. Screaming, so much screaming. Her mother's face, twisted with pain and determination and desperate love, pressing something into infant Alara's hands before the image shattered. Alara woke gasping, her heart pounding like a war drum, sweat soaking through her nightclothes despite the cold room. Her hands were clenched so tight her nails had drawn blood from her palms, small crescents weeping red. A knock at the door, sharp and urgent. "Alara?" Kael's voice, rough with concern. She wrapped herself in a robe with shaking hands and opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still fully dressed despite the late hour, his expression concerned and alert. "I heard you cry out. The guards were about to break down your door." "A dream, just a dream." But her hands were shaking, her breath still coming in gasps. "A memory, maybe. I don't know anymore." Kael's eyes dropped to her bleeding palms and his expression darkened. Without a word, he took them gently in his own, examining the small crescents with careful attention. "Come." He led her to his own chambers, larger, darker, dominated by a massive bed and walls lined with weapons and detailed maps marking every territory, every strategic position. He guided her to sit on the edge of the bed while he retrieved a first aid kit, cleaning and bandaging her palms with surprising gentleness for hands that had killed so many. "Tell me about the dream," he said quietly, his fingers steady as he worked. So she did. The words spilled out, her mother's advice, the fire, the sense of something important lost or forgotten, the way the memory felt both real and impossible. Kael listened without interruption, his hands steady and warm, his presence grounding her. "Your mother was right," he finally said, finishing with her palms but not letting go of her hands. "Power alone isn't enough. I learned that the hard way." "How?" Alara asked, grateful for the distraction, for something to focus on besides the lingering terror of the dream. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing absent circles on her wrists. "When I first became king, I was 20 years old and convinced I knew everything. I thought strength was everything, the biggest army, the most territory, the most fear. I crushed challenges, eliminated threats without mercy, ruled through fear and overwhelming force. It worked. For a while. My territory expanded, Other alphas fell in line. But fear doesn't build loyalty. It builds resentment. People waiting for the moment you show weakness, ready to stick a knife in your back the second the opportunity presents itself. What changed? Alara asked softly. I met someone who showed me a different way. His voice carried old pain, old regret. An old wolf, nearly dead from wounds he'd taken defending his territory. I'd come to claim what was left, to absorb his pack into mine. He was lying in bed, barely breathing, and I asked him why his wolves still fought for him when he was clearly finished. He said, because I gave them something to believe in beyond survival. I showed them a future worth protecting. He died 2 days later, but his pack still thrives under his successor, still loyal to his memory and his vision. So I need to make them love me? No. Kael met her eyes. You need to make them believe in what you represent. Justice. Legitimacy. A return to the old ways before the coup corrupted everything, before power became the only currency that mattered. You don't have to be perfect, Alara. You don't have to be what they expect. You just have to be real, honest. Someone they can believe in when everything else is uncertain. Something shifted between them in that moment, an understanding deepening. The bond they'd been dancing around, the connection they'd both felt but not fully acknowledged, pulled tighter, more insistent, demanding recognition. Kael seemed to feel it too. His grip on her hands tightened, his breathing changing subtly. I should let you rest. You have a long day tomorrow. Stay. The word came out before she could think about it, before fear could make her swallow it back. The word hung in the air between them. Alara. His voice was rough, conflicted. Please, I don't want to be alone tonight. I don't want to dream about fire and death. Just stay. Please. He hesitated, clearly warring with himself, tension visible in every line of his body. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, but we should establish some boundaries. Just hold me, she interrupted. That's all I'm asking. They lay together on top of the covers, fully clothed, bodies carefully positioned. But Kael's arms came around her, solid and warm and safe, and Alara felt something inside her unclench. The intimacy of it, the trust, the vulnerability, was overwhelming in a way that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with being seen. Really seen. She fell asleep feeling safer than she had in her entire life, wrapped in the arms of a king who'd chosen her when she was nothing. And for once, her dreams were peaceful, filled with running through moonlit forests with a black wolf at her side. The next week passed in a blur of training, studying, and preparation. Alara's body adapted with startling speed, her wolf's power accelerating her healing and strength beyond normal limits. By the 5th day, she could hold her own against Kael for a full minute of intense combat before he inevitably won. By the 7th day, she'd actually managed to pin him once, though he'd reversed it within 3 seconds. The pride in his eyes was unmistakable and worth every bruise. But physical training was only part of the preparation. Morgan taught her to read people, the micro-expressions that betrayed lies, the body language that revealed intentions, the subtle tells that separated genuine emotion from performance. Thane drilled her on military strategy, using historical battles to illustrate principles of warfare, terrain advantage, supply lines, the importance of morale. Dax showed her how to kill quickly and efficiently should the need arise, demonstrating holds and strikes that could end a fight in seconds. And through it all, messengers came and went with increasing frequency, carrying reports from across the territories about troop movements, political alliances, whispered threats. The news wasn't good. 3 major pacts have formally announced their support for the council, Morgan reported on day 9, spreading documents across the table. They're calling your claim illegitimate, saying the Veilborn line died with your parents, and that you're either an imposter or a broken wolf with delusions. Let them, Alara said, scanning the latest intelligence reports with increasing confidence. She'd learned to read them quickly, to extract the important details buried in formal language and political doublespeak. Words are cheap. What we need to know is where their forces are actually positioned, where they're vulnerable. Here, and here, Thane pointed to positions on the map with his scarred hand. They're consolidating near the old Northern Kingdom borders. Classic defensive positioning, protecting supply lines, or preparing for an offensive push. Kyle studied the map with the intensity of someone who'd fought enough wars to recognize the patterns, to see the strategy beneath the tactics. If they strike before the summit, they could claim we broke the terms of the agreement first, paint us as aggressors. Then we need leverage. Alara's mind raced, pieces clicking into place like a puzzle she was learning to solve. Something that makes them more afraid of attacking us than negotiating. Such as? Morgan asked, watching her with sharp interest. Alara looked at Kyle, an idea forming. How many packs are currently neutral? Not supporting the council, but not supporting me either? Approximately 40% of the Northern Territories. He saw where she was going, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. You want to flip them? I want to give them a reason to flip themselves. Alara turned to Morgan, excitement building. You said 3 packs announced support for the council. How many packs have current grievances against those 3? Old wounds, unresolved conflicts. Morgan's eyes lit up with understanding, her mind already working through possibilities. Enough. Border disputes that have festered for years. Resource conflicts. Old blood feuds that go back generations. The council's supporters aren't universally loved. Some are actively hated. Then we exploit that. Quietly. We reach out to the packs that have been wronged, offer them alliance. Protection under legitimate authority. A chance to settle old scores legally through a queen's justice instead of open warfare. Alara traced territories on the map, seeing the strategic possibilities. We don't need to win everyone. We just need enough to make the council think twice about open conflict. Enough to make them realize the cost of war might exceed the value of what they're protecting. Thane nodded slowly, respect growing in his expression. It could work, but it requires delicate timing and perfect execution. If the council catches wind of what we're doing before we secure commitments, they'll accelerate their plans. Strike while we're still weak. Then we move fast and quiet. Alara looked at each council member, seeing the shift in how they regarded her, not as a liability anymore, but as someone who might actually succeed. Can it be done? It can, Kyle said, but you'll need to be the one making the offers. They need to see you, hear you, believe in you as more than just a name or a bloodline. A princess's word carries more weight than a king's when it comes to Northern Territories. It has to be your voice, your promise. The prospect terrified her, made her stomach clench with anxiety. I've never negotiated with alphas before, never even spoken to most of them as an equal. You negotiate with me every day, Kyle pointed out gently. Every training session, every council meeting, every conversation we have is negotiation. This is just a larger scale with higher stakes. Over the next 3 days, Alara met with representatives from 7 neutral packs, each meeting arranged in secret locations, each one carrying enormous risk. The meetings were tense, fraught with suspicion and old prejudices that wouldn't die easily. Some dismissed her outright, calling her a pretender or worse. Others listened but made no commitments, clearly waiting to see which side would win before choosing. But 3 agreed to alliance. 3 packs willing to stand with the lost princess against the council's entrenched power. It wasn't enough to guarantee victory in a war, but it was a start, a foundation to build on. The night before the summit, Alara stood on the fortress balcony, looking out over the Northern Territories she was supposed to reclaim, the lands her ancestors had ruled for centuries. The moon hung heavy and full, painting everything in silver light that made the world look both beautiful and strange. Frost glittered on distant mountains. Having second thoughts? She didn't turn, didn't need to. She knew Kyle's presence by instinct now, could feel him approach like a shift in the air itself. Constantly, every minute of every day. He joined her at the railing, his shoulder brushing hers in a contact that sent warmth through her despite the freezing air. It's not too late to walk away. We could disappear, go somewhere the council can't reach, live quietly under assumed names. You'd be safe. Could you? Really? Could you give up your kingdom, your purpose, everything you've built? No. His smile was rueful, honest. But I'd try. For you. Alara finally looked at him, really looked at him in the moonlight. This king who'd turned his world upside down for a servant girl he barely knew, who'd killed for her, trained her, given her every resource at his disposal without asking for anything in return except that she survive. Why? she asked, the question she'd been circling for days. Why risk everything? Your crown, your kingdom, your life. For me? The mate bond doesn't explain all of it. You could have rejected it, walked away. Kale was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, raw with emotion he usually kept locked away. Because when I saw you collapse in that hall, bleeding and broken and still trying to stand, something in me recognized something in you. Not just the mate bond, though that's part of it. Something deeper. Something that matters more. He paused, choosing words carefully. You'd survived 23 years of hell and still had the courage to stand up when they tried to beat you down. Still had fight left when any reasonable person would have broken. That's rare. Precious beyond measure. Most wolves I know would have shattered under a fraction of what you endured. His hand found hers on the railing, fingers intertwining. You ask why I'd risk everything? Because you already did. Every single day of your life, you risked everything just by continuing to exist, by refusing to give them the satisfaction of destroying you completely. That takes a strength most wolves never develop, never even understand, a strength worth fighting for, worth dying for, if it comes to that. Alara's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't name. I'm not strong. I'm terrified every moment. I'm making this up as I go, hoping I don't get everyone killed. Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it, making the hard choices when everything in you wants to run. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Tomorrow, you walk into that summit as a queen, and you'll terrify them, Alara. Not because of your wolf or your bloodline, but because they've built their entire power structure on the assumption you were dead. Your survival destroys their legitimacy. Your very existence is the weapon. You don't even have to fight. You just have to be real, be present, be undeniable. And if they try to eliminate that weapon, if they decide killing me is easier than negotiating, then they'll have to go through me first. Kale's eyes flashed with something fierce and protective, his wolf rising to the surface. And I promise you, they won't. Not while I draw breath. The summit meeting was held in neutral territory, an ancient stone amphitheater that had hosted negotiations and trials for centuries, built by ancestors whose names had been forgotten but whose architecture endured. 12 council members sat in a semicircle on raised stone seats, their advisors and guards arranged behind them in careful formation. Neutral observers lined the upper tiers, representatives from dozens of packs come to witness history to see if the lost princess was real or just another pretender. Alara walked in alone. It was a calculated choice, discussed at length with the War Council. Kael waited outside with his forces, ready to intervene if necessary, but this moment needed to be hers. She wore simple clothes, practical leather and linen, no crown, no jewels, no symbols of royalty. She was a warrior princess, not a decorative one. Her white hair was pulled back simply, her silver eyes the only adornment she needed. The assembled alphas stared as she entered, the silence thick and heavy. Some with hostility barely concealed, some with curiosity tinged with fear, a few with barely disguised terror at what her survival meant for their stolen power. Good. Let them be afraid. Princess Alara Valborn, Cornelius announced formally, standing from his seat. Welcome. We are honored by your presence. Please, be seated so we may begin. Alara's eyes swept the amphitheater. There was no chair for her, no seat provided at the council level. They'd left her standing below them, literally looking up, forced to crane her neck while they looked down. A calculated insult. A test. She smiled, the expression cold and sharp. I prefer to stand. It's easier to look my enemies in the eye from this angle. And I've spent enough of my life looking up at those who thought themselves my betters. Nervous laughter rippled through the observers in the upper tiers. Cornelius's expression tightened, a muscle jumping in his jaw. We are not your enemies, Your Highness. We're here to negotiate in good faith. You're here because you have no choice, Alara interrupted, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's perfect acoustics. Because I'm alive, and my survival invalidates every claim you've made for 23 years, every territory you hold, every title you claim, every law you've passed, all of it built on the lie that my bloodline ended. So let's dispense with the pleasantries and the pretense of friendship. I know what you did. You know what you did. The only question now is what happens next. Do we build something new together, or do we burn everything down and see what rises from the ashes? Darius stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger, his hands clenched into fists. You dare accuse this council, assembled leaders of the most powerful packs in the north, of benefiting from my family's murder? Yes, I dare. Alara's silver eyes locked on him, unblinking, predatory. You hold 3 territories that belong to the Northern Kingdom. Territories you claimed after the coup through legal redistribution. Territories that are rightfully mine by every law that existed before you rewrote them to suit your theft. Claimed legally through proper channels and recognized procedures. Claimed through blood and treachery and the murder of everyone who could challenge you. Alara's voice cut like a blade. But I'm not here to debate ancient history or argue legal technicalities. I'm here to offer you a choice. One chance to do this the civilized way. That got their attention. The amphitheater went silent, every eye fixed on her. What choice? Cornelius asked carefully, wariness in every syllable. Return what you stole willingly, and I'll grant you clemency. Retain a portion of your current holdings, we can negotiate the percentages, in exchange for sworn loyalty to the restored crown. Acknowledge my claim, bend the knee, and we move forward together. She let the offer hang in the air for a moment. Refuse, and I'll take it all back by force. Every territory, every resource, every coin. I'll tear down everything you've built and scatter the pieces to the wind. Your choice, peace or war, negotiation or annihilation. This is absurd. Another alpha stood, older, his face mottled with rage and disbelief. You're one wolf with delusions of grandeur. You have no army, no established support. No, I have 3 allied packs sworn to my banner as of 3 days ago, Alara said calmly, watching the information land like physical blows. I have the legal right to every territory north of the Stormbreak Range under laws your own ancestors wrote and swore to uphold. I have a white wolf that your grandparents told stories about to frighten misbehaving children. And I have the king of the Northern Territories standing with me, his full military and resources pledged to my cause. She smiled coldly, showing teeth. What do you have? Stolen land and guilty consciences? Armies built on foundations of lies? How long do you think those will hold when the truth comes for you? The amphitheater erupted into chaos. Alphas shouting, advisors conferring frantically, observers murmuring amongst themselves in a growing roar. Fear and anger mixed in the air like a toxic brew. Cornelius raised his hand for silence. It took several long minutes to achieve, his authority barely sufficient to control the room. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. You said 3 allied packs. Which 3? Alara named them, watching recognition and dismay spread across multiple faces like ripples in water. Those 3 packs controlled strategic mountain passes and river crossings that would make any military campaign exponentially more difficult. They'd chosen well, and everyone in the room knew it. This is blackmail, Darius spat, his face twisted with fury. Naked extortion. This is negotiation, Alara corrected, her voice steady. I'm giving you a peaceful option, a way forward that doesn't involve rivers of blood and burned territories. Take it or don't. But make no mistake, I'm reclaiming my kingdom. I'm taking back what my family built and what you stole. The only question is how much blood gets spilled in the process. That's entirely up to you. And if we refuse? If we call your bluff? Then we fight. And I promise you, I've spent 23 years learning how to survive against impossible odds. I'm very, very good at it. And unlike you, I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Her smile turned savage. How much are you willing to lose to keep stolen goods? Silence fell like a hammer. Heavy. Charged with possibility and threat. Then, unexpectedly, a younger alpha Alara didn't recognize stood. He was maybe 30, with intelligent eyes and an air of careful consideration. I have a question, Your Highness, if I may. Ask. You speak of reclaiming your kingdom, of justice and legal rights. But what kind of ruler will you be? Your mother was known across the territories for compassion and fairness, for justice tempered with mercy. Will you follow her example? Or will this be a reign of vengeance, of punishing everyone who benefited even indirectly from circumstances beyond their control? The question struck at the heart of everything, the fear underlying all their resistance. Alara could feel every eye on her, waiting, judging her answer. This moment would define everything that followed. She thought of her mother's words from the dream, of Kael's lessons, of everything she'd learned in the past 2 weeks about power and leadership and the weight of crowns. My mother ruled with compassion, she said slowly, choosing each word with care. But she also ruled in peacetime, in prosperity. I'm inheriting a kingdom built on her corpse, territories divided among wolves who benefited from her death, a power structure founded on blood and lies. Compassion alone won't rebuild that. It won't restore justice or create lasting peace. She paused, letting the truth settle. But neither will vengeance. Vengeance is easy. It's also empty, pointless, a waste of energy that could be spent building something better. No, what I offer is something harder than either compassion or vengeance. I offer justice, real justice. Those who actively participated in the coup, who planned it, executed it, covered it up, will face trial under the old laws. Those who simply accepted the redistribution that followed, who took what was offered without asking too many questions. She looked at Cornelius, then at the others, meeting each gaze. Those wolves will have the chance to make amends, to prove their loyalty through action, not empty words, to help build the kingdom my mother envisioned instead of the fractured mess we have now. And how do we prove loyalty to a queen we don't know? The young Alpha pressed. How do we trust that you'll honor that bargain? By choosing her now, when it costs you something. Kael's voice rang out, powerful and clear. He'd entered the amphitheater silently, his presence immediately dominating the space despite making no threatening moves. He walked directly to Alara's side, not touching her but standing close enough to make his allegiance unmistakable, his support absolute. You want guarantees? Kael continued, his voice carrying to every corner. Here's one. I've staked my crown on her legitimacy. I've put my resources, my armies, my entire kingdom behind her claim. If you think I'd do that for anything less than absolute certainty, for anyone less than someone worthy of that risk, then you don't know me at all. And if you don't know me after 8 years of my rule, then you haven't been paying attention. The weight of his words settled over the assembly like a physical force. Kael's reputation was legendary. His word considered unbreakable, his judgment trusted even by enemies. If he believed in Alara, that carried weight nothing else could match. Cornelius stood slowly, looking older and more tired than he had an hour ago. Your Majesty, Your Highness, may we have time to deliberate among ourselves? This is a decision that affects millions of lives across dozens of territories. It shouldn't be made hastily or under pressure. You have 1 hour, Alara said, her voice firm. Use it wisely. Decide if you want to be part of building something new or if you'd rather die defending something stolen. But decide. The council withdrew to a private chamber, leaving Alara and Kael standing in the amphitheater with hundreds of eyes watching from the upper tiers. That was a risk, Kael said quietly once they were alone, giving them time to coordinate, to plan. It was necessary, Alara replied, watching the chamber door close. Forcing an immediate answer makes them feel cornered, trapped. Cornered wolves do stupid, desperate things. This way, they feel like they have agency, like they're choosing instead of being forced, even if the outcome is the same. You've learned well. I had good teachers. She looked at him, gratitude and something deeper warming her chest. Thank you for standing with me, for risking everything. Always, Kael said, and the word was a vow that resonated in her bones. In this life and whatever comes after. They waited in tense silence, guards positioned at every entrance, neutral observers watching from a careful distance. Alara's wolf paced beneath her skin, sensing the enormous importance of this moment, ready to fight if the council chose violence over negotiation. 50 minutes later, the heavy door opened. The council emerged in a group, their expressions varied, some resigned, some angry, a few actually relieved. Cornelius looked older than he had an hour ago, more tired, carrying the weight of impossible choices. We've reached a decision, he announced, his voice formal and carefully controlled. Not unanimously, there are strong disagreements, but with majority support. 8 votes in favor, 4 opposed. Alara's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must hear it. And? We accept your terms. With conditions. Hope and caution warred in her chest, neither winning. What conditions? First, a formal coronation within 1 month. You'll be crowned Queen of the Northern Territories in a ceremony attended by all allied pacts and neutral observers. This makes your claim official, public, and legally binding under the old laws. Agreed. Second, establishment of a formal council of advisors drawn from all territories, ensuring fair representation for all regions. You rule as queen, but not as a tyrant. There must be checks, balances, voices other than your own. I never intended to be a tyrant. Agreed. Third, Cornelius hesitated, exchanging glances with the other alphas. Third, you marry within 6 months, to an alpha of appropriate standing and bloodline, securing your line and creating a stable succession. The Northern Kingdom cannot afford another succession crisis. The words hit like a physical blow, unexpected and disorienting. Alara's mind reeled, her carefully constructed plans suddenly including variables she hadn't even considered. Marriage. She hadn't thought about, hadn't even begun to. She's already bonded, Kael said, his voice deadly quiet but carrying clearly through the amphitheater. To me, we're fated mates. Shock rippled through the council like an earthquake. Several alphas stood abruptly, protests erupting in a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. The mate bond doesn't automatically, this hasn't been formalized or announced. You can't seriously expect us to, enough! Cornelius's shout silenced them, his alpha authority finally asserting itself fully. He looked at Kael, then Alara, his expression unreadable. Is this true? You're fated mates? Not political allies or convenient partners, but genuinely bonded? Yes, Alara said, finding her voice and the certainty beneath her shock. The truth of it resonated in her bones, undeniable. Yes, we are. Cornelius was silent for a long moment, clearly processing implications and complications. Then, slowly, something like resignation crossed his face. Then the third condition is satisfied. A union between the Northern Queen and the Northern King. It's actually politically brilliant, if unorthodox. Unifies the territories completely under a single ruling pair. Some might say it concentrates too much power in too few hands, Darius said darkly, his expression murderous. Creates a dynasty that could dominate for generations. And some might say it's exactly what these fractured territories need after 23 years of chaos, the young alpha from earlier countered, his voice carrying unexpected authority. Unity, strength, a clear line of succession, and a power structure stable enough to actually govern instead of constantly fighting internal conflicts. The debate continued for several more minutes, but Alara could see and feel the tide turning. Not all the alphas were happy. Darius looked ready to commit murder, but enough had accepted the new reality, had done the political calculus and realized resistance was futile. She was going to be queen, and apparently she was going to marry a king. Finally, Cornelius raised both hands for silence, his authority settling over the room. All in favor of accepting Princess Alara's claim under the stated terms? 9 hands rose slowly, 9 out of 12. The motion carries. Cornelius's voice carried the weight of history, of centuries of tradition and law. Princess Alara Veilborn is hereby recognized as the rightful queen of the Northern Territories, with all rights, responsibilities, and privileges therein contained. Long may she reign. Long may she reign, the assembly echoed, some voices enthusiastic, others grudging, but all present and accounted for. Alara stood frozen, the magnitude of what had just happened crashing over her in waves. 2 weeks ago, she'd been a servant, a broken thing, invisible, worthless. Now she was a queen. Kael's hand found hers, squeezing gently, grounding her in reality. She looked at him and saw pride blazing in his black eyes, saw belief in something deeper that made her chest ache with emotion she had no name for. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," he murmured, his voice carrying layers of meaning only she could hear. The words should have felt foreign, wrong, impossible. Instead, they felt like recognition, like coming home after a lifetime of exile, like the world finally making sense. The world finally made sense. Elara stood in the amphitheater as the council members began to disperse, their advisors already whispering furiously about implications and strategies, about what this seismic shift in power meant for their territories. But she barely heard them. The recognition, Queen, echoed through her consciousness like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Kael's hand remained steady in hers, anchoring her to reality when everything else felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "We should go," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd with the wariness of someone who'd survived too many assassination attempts to ever fully relax. Cornelius may have accepted the terms, but Darius looked ready to start a war right here. He was right. Elara had caught the murder in Darius's eyes, the barely restrained fury. Accepting her claim didn't mean everyone was happy about it. Some would be planning already, looking for weaknesses, waiting for opportunities. Let them plan. She'd survived worse than political maneuvering. They left the amphitheater surrounded by Kael's guards, a moving wall of muscle and steel that parted the crowd. Elara caught glimpses of faces in the masses, some awed, some fearful, a few openly hostile. The young alpha who'd questioned her caught her eye and nodded once, a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. She nodded back. The journey back to Kael's fortress took 3 hours by horse, the winter landscape stark and beautiful under afternoon sun. Elara rode in silence, her mind processing everything that had happened, everything that would happen now. A coronation within a month, a wedding within 6, a kingdom to rebuild from fractured pieces. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt oddly calm, focused, like she'd finally found the path she was meant to walk, even if it was one she'd never imagined existed. "You're quiet," Kael observed, riding beside her, thinking. "About?" "Everything. Nothing. How 2 weeks ago I was a servant, and now I'm apparently going to be crowned queen and married to a king." She looked at him. "Does any of this feel real to you?" "No," he admitted, "but the best things rarely do at first." Back at the fortress, the War Council convened immediately. News had already spread. Morrigan's network worked with terrifying efficiency, and the mood was cautiously celebratory. "The council accepted," Thane said, something like approval in his gruff voice. "I'll admit, I didn't think you'd pull it off. Thought we'd be planning a war right now." "We still might be," Morrigan cautioned, spreading fresh intelligence reports across the table. Darius left the amphitheater and immediately sent messengers to at least 6 other territories. "He's consolidating opposition." "How much opposition?" Elara asked, leaning over the maps, already thinking strategically. "Hard to say. Maybe 20% of the northern territories, maybe more. Wolves who benefit too much from the current system to accept change peacefully." 20% is manageable," Kael said, "especially with the council's official recognition. They'd be rebels, not legitimate opposition." "Unless they strike before the coronation," Dax rumbled. "Kill her before she's officially crowned. Claim it was a preemptive defense against a pretender. Messy, but some would accept it." The casual discussion of her potential murder should have been disturbing. Instead, Elara found it oddly grounding. This was the reality of power, constant threat, endless calculation. "Then we accelerate the timeline," she said. "How quickly can a coronation be arranged?" "Traditionally, these things take months of preparation," Thane said. "Invitations, ceremonies, protocols." "Forget tradition. How quickly?" The council members exchanged glances. Morgan spoke first. 2 weeks if we cut every corner and call in every favor. It won't be the grand spectacle your mother's coronation was, but it will be legitimate." "Then we do it in 2 weeks." Elara's decision was immediate, instinctive. The longer we wait, the more time Darius has to organize. We move fast, establish legitimacy before he can mount serious opposition. "Aggressive," Thane said. "I like it." "There's another complication," Morrigan said carefully. "The coronation requires certain artifacts. The crown of the North, specifically. It was worn by every Valeborn monarch for 3 centuries. Where is it?" Morgan's expression was grim. "According to our intelligence, it was taken during the coup and hidden. We've tracked it to a vault in Shadowfen territory, Darius's territory." "Of course it was. So we ask him to return it," Elara said. "He'll refuse," Kael said flatly. "It's leverage, proof he has something you need. He'll try to negotiate, to extract concessions. Then we don't ask. Alara looked at each council member. We take it. Silence fell around the table. You're talking about a direct assault on an Alpha's territory, Thane said slowly. That's an act of war. No, it's recovering stolen property. Alara's smile was sharp. The crown belongs to the Veil-born line. It was stolen during an illegal coup. I'm simply reclaiming what's mine. If Darius wants to call that an act of war, he can explain to the council why he's harboring stolen royal artifacts. Kyle laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. You're learning to think like a queen. I'm learning to think like someone who's tired of asking permission to take back what belongs to her. The plan came together over the next 6 hours. A small strike team, elite fighters, in and out before Darius could mobilize a response. Kyle insisted on leading it personally. Alara insisted on going with him. Absolutely not, Kale said flatly when she announced her intention. It's too dangerous. It's my crown. I'm going. You're the future queen. We can't risk. I've been risking my life every day for 23 years, Alara interrupted. This is no different. Besides, if we're caught, having me there makes it legitimate recovery, not theft. I need to be there. They argued for another 10 minutes before Kyle finally, grudgingly, agreed, but only if she followed orders and stayed behind the main assault team. Alara accepted the compromise, though she had no intention of staying safely behind anything if the situation demanded otherwise. They left at midnight, 6 wolves moving through darkness like ghosts. Kyle and Alara, plus 4 of his most trusted guards. The journey to Shadowfen took 8 hours at wolf speed, their transformed bodies eating up miles with tireless efficiency. Alara's wolf reveled in the run, in the freedom and power and sheer joy of movement. This was what she'd been denied her entire life, the primal rightness of being what she was meant to be. They reached Darius's estate just before dawn. The vault was in a fortified building separate from the main house, guarded but not heavily. Darius clearly hadn't expected anyone to be bold enough to rob him. Mistake. Kyle's team moved with practiced efficiency, neutralizing guards silently. Alara stayed back as ordered, watching from the shadows, her every instinct screaming to help, to fight. Then the alarm sounded. Someone had triggered a secondary warning system they hadn't detected. Lights blazed across the estate. Shouts erupted. Guards poured from the main house, dozens of them, far more than intelligence had suggested. Fall back! Kyle's voice cut through the chaos. We're compromised. But falling back meant leaving without the crown, meant failure, meant giving Darius exactly the victory he wanted. Alara made a decision. She shifted and ran, not away, but toward the vault. Her white wolf was massive and fast, covering the distance in seconds. Guards tried to intercept her, but she was faster, stronger, driven by desperate need. She crashed through the vault door, reinforced steel, but her wolf's strength shattered it like kindling. Inside, chaos. Artifacts, treasures, stolen goods from a dozen conquered territories. And there, on a pedestal in the center, the crown of the North. Silver and moonstone, ancient and powerful, radiating an energy that called to her blood. Alara shifted back to human form, reached for it with shaking hands. The moment her fingers touched the metal, power exploded through her. Not painful, overwhelming, like touching lightning and surviving. The crown recognized her, resonated with her bloodline, and something that had been dormant for 23 years roared to life. Memories flooded her consciousness, not her own, but her ancestors. Centuries of Veil-born rulers, their knowledge, their power, their strength flowing into her like water filling an empty vessel. She understood now. The crown wasn't just a symbol. It was a conduit, a connection to every queen who'd worn it before her. She placed it on her head. The world exploded in white light. When her vision cleared, she stood in the center of the vault wearing the crown, and her wolf, her beautiful, terrible, powerful wolf, had emerged without her consciously shifting. But she was still aware, still in control, a perfect fusion of human and animal consciousness. Guards burst through the broken door and stopped dead. She was magnificent, terrifying, a white wolf the size of a small horse, silver eyes blazing with power, wearing a crown that blazed with its own inner light. The guards ran. Smart choice. Alara, still holding that dual consciousness, walked out of the vault and into chaos. Kael's team was surrounded, fighting desperately against overwhelming numbers. They were good, but they were outnumbered 5-1. Alara's roar shook the estate to its foundations. Every wolf present felt it in their bones, the call of a true alpha, a queen, something primal and undeniable. The fighting stopped, heads turned, jaws dropped. She walked through the battlefield, and guards scattered before her like leaves before a storm. Those who didn't move fast enough, she moved through, not killing, but incapacitating with brutal efficiency. She reached Kael, who stood frozen, staring at her with something between awe and disbelief. Their eyes met, silver and black, queen and king, and understanding passed between them. The bond snapped fully into place, no longer just potential, but realized reality. Mates, partners, equals. Together they fought their way clear, Alara's presence preventing anyone from seriously trying to stop them. By the time Darius emerged from his mansion, they were gone, disappeared into the forest with the crown secured. The journey back was triumphant, energized. Alara had proven something to herself, to Kael's guards, to anyone who'd thought her weak or untested. She was dangerous, powerful, worthy of the crown she'd quite literally stolen back. When they reached the fortress, dawn was breaking. Alara finally allowed herself to shift back, the crown still on her head, glowing softly in the early light. Kael shifted beside her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't follow orders." "I got the crown." "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." Alara met his eyes steadily. "And now we have what we need for the coronation." "Was I wrong?" Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. "No, you were perfect." The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Invitations sent across every territory. The amphitheater prepared for a ceremony that would be witnessed by thousands. Alara fitted for ceremonial robes, taught protocols she'd never needed to know, briefed on the political implications of every gesture and word. She hated most of it, the formality, the performance, the endless rules about what a queen should and shouldn't do. But she understood its necessity. Symbols mattered. Ceremony created legitimacy. Morgan's network reported that Darius was livid about the crown theft but couldn't publicly complain without admitting he'd been harboring stolen royal artifacts. He'd been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. But he hadn't given up. Intelligence suggested he was planning something for the coronation itself. An objection, maybe, a challenge, something to disrupt or delegitimize the ceremony. "Let him try," Alara said when the council briefed her. "I'm done being afraid of wolves like Darius." The night before the coronation, she couldn't sleep. She stood on her balcony watching the moon, the crown resting on a table beside her. Tomorrow, she would be queen. Officially, irrevocably, publicly. "Second thoughts?" She smiled without turning. "You ask me that a lot." Kael joined her, wrapping a cloak around her shoulders against the cold. "And you never give me a straight answer." "Because the answer changes every hour." She leaned into his warmth. "Right now? No second thoughts, just awareness of how much is about to change, how much responsibility I'm taking on." "You don't have to do this alone," Kael reminded her gently. "We're partners, mates. What's mine is yours, including the burden of leadership." "Is that a proposal?" The question came out half joking, half serious. "Would you want it to be?" Alara turned to face him fully. "I don't know. 2 weeks ago, I didn't think I'd live long enough to worry about marriage. Now I'm supposed to plan a wedding within 6 months because the council demands stable succession." She paused. "What do you want?" Kael's expression turned serious, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. "I want you, however you'll have me. As a political partner if that's all you can manage. As a mate if you'll accept the bond fully. As a husband if you'll take that risk." He cupped her face gently. "I've spent 5 years searching for you, Alara. I'm not going to rush you now that I've found you. We'll figure out the details as we go." "The council won't accept figuring it out as we go." "Then we'll give them a wedding and figure out the marriage as we go." His smile was wry. "I'm told that's what most couples do anyway." Alara laughed despite herself, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "All right, after the coronation we plan a wedding. Try to make it less terrifying than everything else that's happened." "I make no promises." She kissed him then, the first real kiss they'd shared. and felt the mate bond flare with approval and rightness. Whatever came next, at least she wouldn't face it alone. The coronation began at noon. The amphitheater was packed, thousands of wolves from across the northern territories packed into every available space. The 12 council members sat in their traditional positions. Allied alphas occupied places of honor. Even neutral territories had sent representatives, unwilling to miss this historic moment. Alara walked in alone, as tradition demanded. She wore ceremonial robes of white and silver, her hair unbound, the crown not yet on her head but carried by an attendant behind her. She felt every eye on her, judging, assessing, still looking for reasons to doubt. Let them look. She'd earned this, survived for it, bled for it. She would not be diminished by their doubt. The ceremony itself was ancient, words spoken in the old tongue, rituals performed that stretched back centuries. Cornelius officiated, his voice carrying clearly through the perfect acoustics. "Who comes before this assembly?" he asked. "Alara Veilborn, daughter of Mira and Demon, last of her line, rightful heir to the northern kingdom." Her voice was steady, strong, carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. "And what do you seek?" "To claim what is mine by blood and law, to restore what was broken, to rule with justice and strength. Will you swear the ancient oaths? To protect your people, to uphold the old laws, to sacrifice your comfort for their safety, to lead with wisdom and courage?" "I swear it, by my blood and my wolf, by the moon and the old ways, I swear it." "Then let any who would challenge this claim speak now, or be forever bound by this decision." Silence. Alara's heart pounded. This was the moment Darius would make his move if he was going to. This was when everything could still fall apart. The silence stretched. And then, "I challenge." Not Darius. Someone else. A voice Alara didn't recognize. An older wolf stood in the observer section, his clothes marking him as minor nobility, his face twisted with long-buried rage. "I challenge this coronation on the grounds that this woman is not who she claims to be." "Oh," murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cornelius's expression tightened. "State your name and your evidence." "I am Marcus Ravencroft, former steward of the Northern Kingdom. I served Queen Mira for 20 years. He pointed at Alara. "That woman cannot be Princess Alara. I saw the princess die. I was there the night of the coup." Alara's blood ran cold. This hadn't been in any intelligence report. This was... "You're lying," Kael said, standing from his position, his voice deadly. "Or you're mistaken. The bodies were never recovered." "Because there were no bodies to recover." Marcus's voice cracked. "The fire consumed everything. I saw the princess in her nursery. I tried to reach her, but the flames..." His voice broke. "No one could have survived that inferno. This woman is an imposter, using a clever deception and a white wolf bloodline from another source to claim power she has no right to." The amphitheater erupted. Shouts, accusations, demands for proof from both sides. The ceremony was collapsing into chaos. Alara stood frozen, her mind racing. She had no proof beyond her blood, her wolf, the crown's recognition. What if he was right? What if she'd been wrong about everything? What if the memories were false, implanted somehow, and she was just... No. She knew who she was, felt it in her bones, in her wolf, in the way the crown sang to her blood. This man was lying, or mistaken, or part of Darius's plan to disrupt the coronation. She had to prove it, had to make them believe. "You want proof?" Alara's voice cut through the chaos, silencing the crowd. "You want undeniable evidence that I am who I claim to be?" She walked to the center of the amphitheater, to the ceremonial circle where coronations had been performed for centuries. The crown was brought to her, and she took it with steady hands. "The crown recognizes true blood," she said, holding it up for all to see. "It has for 300 years. Every Veilborn who wore it was acknowledged by its power. Every pretender who tried was rejected, sometimes fatally." She placed the crown on her head. Power exploded through her again, but this time she was ready for it. She didn't fight it, didn't try to control it. She opened herself completely to the crown's magic, to her ancestors' accumulated power, to everything the Veilborn bloodline represented. The crown blazed with light so brilliant that wolves had to shield their eyes. Power radiated from Alara in visible waves, making the air itself shimmer. And her wolf emerged, not a shift, but a manifestation, her white wolf form overlaying her human body like a ghost, both present simultaneously. The amphitheater went absolutely silent. This was power beyond anything most wolves had ever witnessed. This was legend made manifest. When Alara spoke, her voice carried the echo of every queen before her, a chorus of feminine strength spanning centuries. I am Alara Veilborn, daughter of the Lost Kingdom, heir to broken crowns. The crown knows me. My blood knows itself. And if that's not enough for you, she focused on Marcus, letting the full weight of her power crash over him. Then look at me with your wolf's eyes and tell me I'm not royal. Tell me you don't recognize what I am. Marcus fell to his knees, his wolf forcing submission, unable to resist the sheer weight of her presence. Around the amphitheater, other wolves were doing the same, dropping to their knees, heads bowed, necks exposed. Not because they were ordered, because their instincts demanded it. Alara released the power slowly, pulling it back until she stood simply as herself again, a young woman in ceremonial robes wearing a crown that had chosen her. Does anyone else wish to challenge my claim? Her voice was quiet now, conversational. Because I'm happy to provide more proof. I can stand here all day. No one spoke. Even Marcus remained on his knees, his challenge forgotten, his wolf still cowering in submission. Cornelius cleared his throat, clearly shaken but determined to complete the ceremony. As there are no further challenges, we proceed. Alara Veilborn, you have sworn the oaths, proven your blood, and claimed your heritage. By the power vested in this council and the ancient laws we uphold, I crown you Queen of the Northern Territories. He didn't need to actually place the crown. It was already there, blazing softly with its own inner light. Long live the Queen, Cornelius called out. Long live the Queen, the assembly roared back. Thousands of voices united in recognition. Alara stood in the center of it all, feeling the weight of the crown, the responsibility, the power, and thought about how far she'd come. From broken servant to crowned queen in less than a month. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt inevitable. After the ceremony came celebration, feasting, music, political maneuvering disguised as casual conversation. Alara endured hours of it, accepting congratulations from wolves who'd ignored or mocked her weeks earlier, forming alliances, making promises. But finally, as the moon rose high in silver, she managed to escape to the fortress balcony. Her balcony now, in her fortress, in her kingdom. Kyle found her there, as she'd known he would. You were magnificent today, he said, joining her at the railing. I was terrified. That too, but you didn't let it stop you. He was quiet for a moment. Marcus has confessed. Darius paid him to disrupt the coronation. He's being held for trial. Let him go. Kyle turned to her sharply. What? He's a pawn. An old man manipulated by someone with real power. Punishing him accomplishes nothing except making me look vindictive. Alara looked at Kyle. But Darius, he needs to understand that there are consequences for continuing to oppose this. What kind of consequences? Strip him of one territory, the smallest one he holds. Redistribute it to the packs he's wronged over the years. Alara's smile was cold. Not enough to destroy him, but enough to hurt. Enough to make him think twice before trying again. And if he retaliates, then we'll deal with it. But I don't think he will. Darius is a calculator, not a warrior. He only fights when he thinks he can win without personal risk. Today proved he can't win this fight. Kale studied her for a long moment. You really have become a queen. I'm learning. She leaned against him. With help. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight paint the kingdom silver. Their kingdom now, shared between them. We should probably discuss the wedding, Kyle said eventually. The council will want details soon. Must we? Unfortunately, yes. 6-month deadline, remember? Alara sighed. Fine, but nothing too elaborate. I've had enough ceremony to last a lifetime. I can work with that. Kael's arms came around her. How do you feel about winter weddings? Cold? He laughed. I meant symbolically. New year, new beginning, that sort of thing. Oh, in that case, they sound perfect. They planned the wedding for the winter solstice, the longest night of the year when darkness gave way to returning light. Symbolic and practical, giving them 3 months to prepare instead of 6. The ceremony was held in the great hall of what had been Kael's fortress, and was now officially the Northern Palace. Smaller than the coronation, more intimate, attended only by closest allies and necessary political representatives. Elara wore white, not because of tradition, but because it matched her wolf. Kael wore black for the same reason. They stood before the assembled witnesses and swore oaths that bound them not just politically, but spiritually, magically, permanently. When they kissed, sealing the bond, power flared between them, white and black, light and shadow, perfectly balanced. The feast afterward was warm and genuine, full of laughter and music and hope. Elara found herself actually enjoying it, the weight of responsibility temporarily lifted by celebration. Late in the night, she slipped away from the festivities and found herself in what had been her mother's study, preserved exactly as it had been the night of the coup. Maps on the walls, books on the shelves, a portrait of Mira Veilborn hanging above the desk. Elara looked at her mother's painted face and felt a pang of loss for a woman she'd never really known. "I wish you could have seen this," she whispered. "Wish you could have been here." The portrait, of course, didn't answer, but in the silence, Elara felt something like approval, like blessing. Her mother would have been proud, would have loved seeing her daughter reclaim what had been stolen. "Your Majesty?" Elara turned. A servant stood in the doorway, young, nervous, clearly unused to addressing a queen. "Yes?" "There's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. Says she has information about the coup." Elara's interest sharpened immediately. "Send her in." The woman who entered was old, her face weathered by time and hardship, but her eyes were bright, intelligent, unafraid. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing. "My name is Helena. I was a midwife in the palace the night you were born. I've been hiding for 23 years, waiting for this moment." "What moment?" "The moment I could finally tell the truth." Helena reached into her cloak and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface carved with symbols Elara didn't recognize. "Your mother gave this to me the night of the coup. Made me swear to give it to you when you reclaimed your throne." Elara took the box with shaking hands. "What is it?" "Your birthright. Your mother's final gift. She knew the coup was coming, you see, knew she and your father wouldn't survive, so she made preparations. Made sure you would have what you needed when the time came." Elara opened the box. Inside was a letter in her mother's handwriting, and beneath it, a moonstone pendant that pulsed with soft light. "The pendant contains her memories," Helena explained. "Everything she wanted you to know, her knowledge, her wisdom, her love, all preserved for you." Elara's vision blurred with tears. "Thank you. Thank you for keeping this safe." Helena bowed again. "It was my honor, Your Majesty. Your mother was a great queen. I have no doubt you will be the same." After Helena left, Elara sat alone in the study and read her mother's letter. It was everything she'd needed: advice, encouragement, love spanning 23 years of separation. Her mother had known she would survive, had believed in her daughter's strength even as an infant. When she finally put on the pendant, memories flooded her consciousness. Not overwhelming this time, but gentle. Her mother's voice teaching her, guiding her, preparing her for the role she would one day claim. Kael found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face, smiling. "Elara, what happened?" "She knew," Elara whispered. "My mother knew I'd survive, knew I'd be here. She left me everything I needed." She told him about Helena, about the pendant, about the gift that had waited 23 years to be claimed. Kael pulled her close, letting her cry against his shoulder. "She'd be proud of you, of everything you've become." "I hope so." They stayed like that for a long time, queen and king, mates and partners, finding comfort in each other while the celebration continued without them. In the months that followed, Elara worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been broken. She established new laws, fairer taxation, better distribution of resources. She settled old disputes with a combination of her mother's compassion and her own hard-won understanding of survival. She was not a perfect queen, made mistakes, occasionally showed the temper that came with her wolf, but she was real, honest. Someone wolves could believe in. Darius never openly challenged her again, though intelligence suggested he still worked against her in subtle ways. Alara let him. Some opposition was healthy, kept her sharp, prevented complacency. The three allied pacts who'd stood with her from the beginning were rewarded with expanded territories and positions of honor. Others who'd joined later received recognition proportional to their support. Slowly, carefully, Alara built a network of loyalty based not on fear but on mutual benefit and genuine respect. 6 months after the coronation, she stood on the palace balcony watching the sun rise over her kingdom, truly her kingdom now. Not just by right, but by the work she'd put into rebuilding it. Kael joined her, as he always did for these quiet morning moments. "Good morning, my queen." "Good morning, my king. How are you feeling?" Alara smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. Different, strong, ready. She'd discovered she was pregnant 2 weeks earlier. A child, an heir, the future of the Veilborn line secured. The news hadn't been announced yet, but soon it would be. Soon everyone would know that the lost bloodline had not just survived, but would continue. "Are you afraid?" Kael asked softly. "Terrified," Alara admitted. "But I was terrified when I walked into that summit, when I faced the council, when I stole the crown back. Fear hasn't stopped me yet." "No," Kael agreed, pride evident in his voice. "It hasn't." They stood together watching the kingdom wake, farmers heading to fields, merchants opening shops, children playing in streets that were safer now than they'd been in decades. All of it protected, guided, governed by a queen who understood suffering and survival, who ruled with strength tempered by compassion. Alara thought about the girl she'd been, broken, beaten, convinced she was worthless. That girl still existed inside her, still carried scars that would never fully heal, but she'd been transformed, not into someone different, but into who she'd always been meant to be. A survivor, a fighter, a queen. The white wolf who'd been caged for 23 years was finally free, and she would never be trapped again. In the grand hall, a new portrait was being painted. Alara in her ceremonial robes, crown blazing, her white wolf manifested beside her. It would hang next to her mother's, a testament to continuity and resilience. But that was for later. For now, she stood with her mate, her king, watching the sun rise over a kingdom reborn, and felt something she'd never experienced before. Peace. Not the absence of conflict. There would always be challenges, threats, wolves who opposed her. But inner peace, the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The girl who'd bled on marble floors had become the queen who rebuilt a kingdom, and this was only the beginning. "Ready to start the day?" Kael asked. Alara smiled, fierce and bright and alive. Always. Together they walked back into the palace, into council meetings and political negotiations and the 1,000 small decisions that made up ruling. Into the future they were building, one choice at a time. The broken servant was gone. The White Queen had risen, and she would never bow to anyone again.